Chapter 64. The Notorious Smith Family. Kate's temper snapped the moment the medieval wizard thundered across the hall, proclaiming that she suffered from severe dwarfism. He covered 6 paces in an instant, shoving aside anyone who dared stand in his path until he confronted her on the ancient wooden staircase. "What did you just say I have?" Kate demanded, stamping her foot so hard the boards groaned beneath her. The wizard straightened his pointed hat, stroked his long, silvery beard, and folded his arms. "It's a rare hormonal imbalance, milady. Untreated, it will stunt your arms and legs, even shorten you beyond your current height." "Short?" Kate's face reddened with fury. "Who are you calling short?" She took a step closer, voice low and fierce. "And what is this ridiculous cure you mentioned? Something about slathering a toad's liver on the chest and standing naked in front of a tub of eels under moonlight and sunlight? Spare me the fairy tales." "I assure you, you do not," the wizard persisted. "Your proportions are unmistakably wrong?" Kate interrupted, folding her arms. "Tell me this. If I have dwarfism, does that make my father one too? He's short, just like me. Now kindly return to your own realm and leave me in peace." She whirled around to scan the crowd for Ryan. He stood a few feet behind, cheeks pink, desperately trying to stifle a laugh. He gave her a sheepish shrug and ran a hand through his hair, as if to apologize for finding the whole spectacle so entertaining. Kate exhaled sharply, gripping the banister. Even grudgingly, she had to admit, a little humor was exactly what she needed to diffuse this absurd confrontation. "Which floor are we on now?" Kate's voice drifted muffled through her scarf as she glanced up at the directory. "5th," Ryan replied, steering her toward the platform. He pointed to the heavy double doors ahead, each etched with the words healing and curse damage wing. "Here?" Kate frowned. "It doesn't look right." Ryan shook his head. "Remember what the receptionist said? The Longbottoms are in a secured ward, always locked down tight." He slipped Kate's small hand into his and led her down a silent corridor toward a single door at the far end. Just as Ryan reached for the handle, a young therapist hurried over. She wore a delicate circlet of silver filigree atop her head that caught the pale corridor light. "Excuse me, are you here to see Frank and Alice Longbottom?" she asked, voice warm but edged with tension. Her kindness was immediate, the soft timbre of her words, the gentle tilt of her head. But beneath it lay a flicker of anxiety that made her eyes dart to and fro. Ryan noticed. This was no casual courtesy a stranger might extend. Instead, her gaze on him was cool and calculating, as if she were sizing him up for hidden threats. "Do I know you?" Ryan asked slowly, his grip tightening on Kate's hand. He studied the therapist's face, searching for a name behind the wreath, a clue to her sudden unease. I just wanted to confirm your names," she stammered, voice quavering. "We've had some unusual incidents lately. Protocol requires me to verify every visitor. Please, I hope you understand." Her eyes lingered on Ryan a moment longer, wary, watchful, before she stepped aside and gestured toward the locked door. Ryan nodded once, resolute. "We understand," he said softly. And with that, he reached for the ward's enchanted lock, ready to discover the Longbottom's fate. "Not a single one of you is getting past me if you want to hurt Frank or the others." The healer's face was taut with determination as he planted himself firmly before the closed door. Kate couldn't contain her glee. She hopped from one foot to the other, a mocking grin on her face. "Come on, Ryan. Does the Smith name mean that little to you?" Ryan's expression stayed calm. He met the healer's wary gaze. "Madam, kindly look into my eyes." In that instant, his silver irises seemed to glow. The healer's defiance melted away as though struck by magic. His stance slackened, and he surrendered the gaze before him, utterly entranced. Within seconds, he stood frozen in place. Kate's amusement turned to bewilderment. What just happened? Ryan switched his attention back to her, voice steady. "Rumors." "Rumors?" Kate echoed, puzzled. He took a breath. "About the Smith family. You know how we've lived in the shadows for generations. We've quietly built our fortune, using intricate magical contracts to take shares and dividends in every major British magical industry: food, clothing, housing, transportation. As soon as people catch wind of us, some jump to the worst conclusions." Ryan clenched his fists at his sides, his silver eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Is it wrong for my family to be successful?" he wondered silently. Yet even as doubt flickered in his mind, he refused to show it. He never imagined the Smith's name could sink so low that people would start whispering they were the true heir of Slytherin, just like Harry in the original world line. Almost everyone at St. Mungo's knows the Smith family secretly pulls the strings here, but every therapist who's joined the staff has been forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement. That contract does nothing but forbid them from talking about the Smiths, and yet it's enough to feel like a straitjacket on their freedom. Bitterness over it festers from one generation of healers to the next, until the family's reputation is now talked about more fearfully than Voldemort himself. They even say the very room the last Smith occupied on the 6th floor has become a mad scientist's laboratory, one more chapter in a long list of rumors. And why is treatment at St. Mungo's almost free? Because it's an intelligence-gathering operation. The wizards locked away in high-security wards are nothing more than long-term test subjects for the Smith family's schemes. If you ever turned up here as a time traveler, with no plug-in magic to protect your identity, you'd have a hell of a time proving you weren't one of their lab rats. After all, every whisper in every corridor circles back to that damned contract. No amount of evidence could sway these timid therapists as long as the contract remained in force. But Ryan was different. Whenever words failed him, he called on his magic. "You don't believe me?" he challenged, eyes glowing with golden light. "Then I'll make you believe." The therapist froze under that sudden radiance, but within heartbeats she'd snapped back to reality. Bowing so low her forehead nearly touched the floor, she stammered, I was so overwhelmed I'd believe any rumor." After a full series of apologies, she looked up, cheeks flushed. "It's all right, I'll do what must be done." Ryan offered a small, approving nod. "You're truly a great therapist, brave enough to defend your patients when danger looms." He motioned toward the ward door. At once she straightened and hurried to open it. As soon as she crossed the threshold back into her own territory, the quivering, over-apologetic woman vanished. In her place stood the compassionate healer Ryan knew from his previous visits, greeting her long-term patients with a warm, familiar smile, like a member of their family. The ease and sincerity of her gestures made one thing clear. This kindness was never a performance for outsiders. It was simply who she always was. Ryan stepped into the ward and paused. 4 beds lay before him, 2 nearest the door, 2 more at the far end, shrouded behind floral curtains. He was certain the Longbottoms occupied those curtained beds. But the 2 wizards closest to him clearly weren't the Longbottoms. Even without ever having seen a photograph, Ryan knew the sallow-faced man slouched in one bed, muttering to himself and ignoring the therapist's gentle coaxing, could not be Frank Longbottom. Nor could the wild-haired woman in the next bed, who answered every soft question with a sharp, almost canine bark, be Alice Longbottom. Neither bore so much as a trace of Neville's gentle eyes. The therapist, a kindly witch from St. Mungo's, her robes pinned with a silver emblem, turned from the curtained corner and offered a warm smile. She approached the woman in the second bed. "Agnes," she said softly, "remember how I promised you'd never be forgotten? Well, your son sent an owl just this afternoon. He'll be here tonight to see you. Isn't that wonderful?" Agnes lifted her head and let out a series of eager barks, as though testing her voice. Then she lapsed back into silence, her eyes bright with something like hope. The therapist glanced at Ryan. "We've had fewer patients lately," she explained quietly. "When a family believes there's no more chance of a cure, they often take their loved one home. Only a few, like Agnes's family, refuse to give up entirely." Ryan nodded, wondering what he would say when he finally met the real Longbottoms behind those curtains. "Others have been abandoned by their families," the therapist said with a low sigh, gesturing toward the wizard, muttering to himself. "His family hasn't visited in years." Ryan listened quietly. In the original timeline, Harry Potter wouldn't reach 5th grade for another 2 years. Yet here he was in St. Mungo's, alongside the long-haired witch and the dour-faced wizard, still under care. "And then there's Frank and Alice," the therapist continued. "Mrs. Augusta insistently keeps her son and her son-in-law here, always convinced they'll recover one day. You're telling me that's true?" He turned suddenly to Ryan. "Frank and Alice will be back to normal today, right?" "Smith never lies," Ryan replied with a calm smile. He stepped forward toward the bed, draped in flowered curtains, ready to prove it. Chapter 508. Detective Ryan. Ministry of Magic. Employee dies in bizarre accident. St. Mungo's Hospital pledged last night to conduct a full investigation into the death of Ministry of Magic employee Broderick Bodie. The 49-year-old was found strangled by one of his bedside potted plants, and attending therapist Meliag Straw's attempts to revive him proved unsuccessful. Mr. Bode had been recuperating at St. Mungo's after sustaining serious injuries in a work accident just weeks earlier. Miss Straw, suspended with pay pending the inquiry, declined to comment. As Detective Ryan reviewed the case in his mind palace, a familiar book, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, somehow flipped on its own to Chapter 25, The Beetle at Bay. No breeze had stirred the pages. The odd occurrence triggered a memory. 2 years ago, Ryan had noted a quiet wizard in a locked ward, murmuring to himself and refusing all visitors. His subconscious now roiled with realization. That murmurer had been Broderick Bode. Bode had first been injured in a ministry accident 2 years prior, and this December he'd accidentally died on Christmas Eve. The supposed culprit? A Christmas cactus, enchanted to behave like a devil's snare, positioned at his bedside as a holiday gift. Beneath its festive guise, the plant served as a lethal mechanism. Someone had weaponized Christmas cheer, and Detective Ryan knew he was closer than ever to uncovering who. Broderick Bode's progress had been nothing short of miraculous. After months of therapy, his speech and mobility were finally returning. Encouraged by therapist Straw, Bode was told he could even resume caring for the devil's snare plant kept at his bedside. But the moment he reached out to prune its hideous, writhing vines, the plant lashed out, its tendrils coiling around him in an instant. Within seconds, the recovering wizard was strangled to death. A chill settled over the ward when news of his demise spread, especially among those who remembered the bizarre events of the original timeline. Back then, Harry Potter and his friends had paid a courtesy visit to Arthur Weasley. As they chatted in Mr. Weasley's cluttered parlor, an elderly wizard appeared, his ears amplified by a curious trumpet-shaped hearing aid. He'd come bearing a pot of devil's snare, ostensibly a gift for Bode, a ministry employee, all but forgotten by his own family. None of the visitors realized they were watching an assassination in action. To the outside world, Broderick Bode had been just another junior official, lonely, abandoned, and quietly slipping through the cracks of the Ministry of Magic. In truth, he was one of the Department of Mystery's most enigmatic agents. In December 1995, Bode had been gravely wounded by Death Eaters, suffering brain trauma so severe that he temporarily believed himself to be nothing more than a teapot. Even so, someone high up in the ministry had arranged his transfer to a devil's snare chamber, ensuring his death before he could reveal anything further. What makes this new timeline all the more perplexing is that Lord Voldemort and his last loyal Death Eaters have long since been captured and imprisoned in Azkaban. The Ministry's internal purges have eradicated every known sympathizer. Yet here, in the heart of the institution itself, Bode has been murdered once more, strangled by the very plant he was supposed to tend. With Voldemort gone and the Death Eater network dismantled, the question now haunting every corridor is not who killed Broderick Bode, but who still holds the power to carry out such a brazen act, and why. Even if there are still Death Eaters lurking inside the Ministry of Magic, that alone can't explain why Bode was wounded. After all, Voldemort never made the complete prophecy orb, the Savior prophecy, his primary target. The ambush 2 years ago must instead be linked to the sweeping changes within the Ministry itself. In both timelines, the only constant at the moment of Bode's attack was a major shift in Ministry policy, and therefore, in the original timeline, no matter how few Death Eaters remained, any dramatic upheaval there would have drawn the same assault. But before they could untangle that mystery, Ryan knew he had to verify one crucial detail. "Your name is Melian Straw, isn't it?" he asked, his tone as casual as if he'd asked about the weather, yet delivered barely a heartbeat after she'd uttered the name in the real world. Melian, still pinning her hopes on Ryan's magic to free the Longbottoms, blinked in surprise. "Yes, but how do you know my name?" Ryan gave a light, dismissive wave. Instantly, a pair of simple, black-framed spectacles floated into his hand. He slid them on, and at once his dark blonde hair shifted to jet black. His robes dissolved, replaced by a neat blue jacket, shorts to his knees, and a bright red bow tie. "Nothing special," he replied, adjusting the frame. The lenses flared with a soft white glow, as though containing a world of secrets just waiting to be read. Straw stumbled over her words. "You are." A cold shiver ran down her spine. What if this magic really did draw on Muggle legends? Even stranger, she felt as though she were looking at a detective's uniform, except it was sized for a 7- or 8-year-old. But what exactly was a detective? Before she could sort it out, Kate, always eager to play amateur sleuth, blurred out, "Edogawa Conan? Death God elementary school student?" Straw's mind raced. Death God? A Muggle myth from the United States, she thought. In America's short history, if they even had a god of death, I suppose he'd look something like this. As these questions tumbled through Straw's head, Ryan raised his wand and gave the heavy floral curtain a lazy flick. "Mr. and Mrs. Frank have been healed. They'll wake up sane and well within the hour. For now, there's a more pressing matter. As a famous detective, I intend to solve it." "Ahem, what did you say?" Straw gaped at him. He'd waved his wand, and nothing happened. No flash of light, no swirl of color. Kate, normally quick with an explanation, was uncharacteristically silent. Ryan's sudden cloak of detective drama hung in the air like a question mark. Straw swallowed hard. All at once she wondered who was the victim, who the murderer, and just what case was Ryan about to unravel. The room held its breath. The game, it seemed, was only just beginning. Kate swept her gaze over the cluttered room with clinical precision. "You see, Strow," she began, "truly deafening thunder is silent, and the mightiest elephants are invisible. Now tell me, why was Broderick Bode admitted to St. Elfrida's Hospital? And which department of the ministry was he attached to?" Strow swallowed. "He says he was struck by a rogue backfire from his own wand during an experiment. He lost his voice, started rambling about being a teapot, and then collapsed. He's wrong." Kate's silver eyes narrowed. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. Bode was slain on the 9th floor of the Ministry of Magic, in the brain room of the Department of Mysteries. He wasn't a beater, and he left no next of kin behind. He was a neuromagus, hired specifically to probe the brain's darkest secrets. Straw's face drained of color. "Murder? Are you certain?" He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a discarded quill. "Kate, please check the pillow. Use my sight." Kate crouched by the chaise longue and slid open the pillowcase with an impatient tug. Inside the stuffing lay a small, jet-black button. She held it up, letting the room's lamplight dance over its surface. "This," she said softly, "is a nutshell binding charm, one of the most insidious curses ever devised. It first deprives the victim of speech, then, within hours, it kills. The recent ministry crackdown has driven our murderer to ever more elaborate methods." She slipped the button into a velvet pouch and rose, her expression grim. "Rest assured, Strow, we're dealing with someone who wants us to be silent, and we'll never let that happen." Chapter 12. Ryan held up the odd little button and studied it with a faint smile. "So this is what they call the E-Devil's snare device." Dr. Straw's eyes darted to the object and then back to Ryan. He swallowed hard. "Mr. Smith, I never put this here. Everything in this room was supplied by your factory." Ryan nodded slowly. "Exactly. Now we can talk about the real culprit." Dr. Straw's face went pale. It was that old wizard, the one with the trumpet-shaped hearing aid. He visited poor Bode 2 days ago. Please take this device and my report to Dean McAllister, and tell him I ordered the investigation. The smoking gun is in the wizard's wand. Cast a pensive recall charm on it, and you'll see everything." Ryan's silver eyes glinted, as if a golden clockwork mechanism ticked behind his irises. Dr. Straw instinctively backed away, though he remained in the same room. It felt as though Ryan could peer through time and distance to locate a wand that Dr. Straw himself had lost days ago. "Before you go," Ryan added, pausing to lift a hand, "notify Augusta Longbottom that her son and daughter-in-law are safe." He removed his glasses. In an instant, his tailored blazer and crisp shirt reverted to the rumpled robes he'd worn earlier. His guise as a humble investigator dropped like an illusion. Dr. Straw nodded numbly, snatched up the button, and hurried from the chamber. Kate, who had watched the whole exchange from the doorway, stepped forward. Her brow was furrowed. "That's it? You fingered the murderer, retrieved the device, and even spared Mrs. Longbottom a panic. Yet nobody answers why Bode was attacked in the first place. And why didn't you inform Neville directly? Ryan turned to her, his lips curling into a half-smile. Answers, Kate, are like devil's snare itself. Sometimes you have to know exactly where to look before you can untangle them. He swept out of the room, leaving Kate standing in the silent corridor, determination blazing in her eyes. Certainly. Please go ahead and share the chapter you'd like me to rewrite, and I'll transform it into a smooth, idiomatic English version while preserving all key plot points and details. Chapter 66, Wedges, engraved in the human body. The locked ward was deathly quiet, except for the occasional bark-like groan of a long-haired woman named Agnes, lying propped up on the far side of the room. Ryan said nothing. He merely gave Kate a gentle smile. In the next heartbeat, a gray, translucent wall sprang into being before them. Without hesitation, they stepped through it, their bodies passing through the shimmering barrier as if it were mist. On the other side, stretched a narrow yet sumptuous corridor that wound away into darkness. The floor was paved with smooth bricks and stones, each intricately carved with the forms of powerful, mysterious beasts. Although the sun still ruled high overhead, an otherworldly fog, soft as new-fallen snow, hugged both sides of the passage. Kate paused, the mist drifting around her ankles. Ryan caught her hand, offering quiet reassurance, and together they pressed forward. Then, without warning, the fog ahead swirled in a rolling wave and parted. Two figures emerged, one tall, one short. The shorter of the two swept a hand through the lingering haze, scattering it, and revealed a pale porcelain doll face framed by dark hair. It was Kate herself, back already and restless. "Did you have nothing to tell me while you were in there?" she demanded, voice edged with impatience. Ryan closed the distance, his smile apologetic. "Come on," he said, gently tugging her forward as they stepped out of the mist. "I'll explain why I didn't go to Neville first. Right now, he's off with Harry Potter and the others, and Krum from Durmstrang." Listen to Victor Krum pour out his bitterness. "I don't think this is the right moment for it. And wouldn't it be better to present this belated birthday gift as a surprise? Imagine him and me stepping through the Flu network, just the two of us, back to the mansion, only to find my parents perfectly recovered and waiting for us. What a joyous, wonderful scene that would be." At that, Ryan fell silent. His free hand drifted to the drooping boughs of the roadside oak, fingertips brushing the leaves as if caressing an unseen face. He drew in a soft sigh, uttering words in a language Kate didn't recognize. That was precisely why he'd never taught her Chinese. Some thoughts, some quiet vulnerabilities, are meant to remain unshared. "Ryan, what are you saying? Are you all right?" Kate asked, leaning forward to rest her hand gently against his cheek. He shook his head and eased away from her touch. "I'm fine," he said, forcing a small smile. "But let's talk about the Broderick Bird murder case. Like flowing water, its truth has no fixed shape. Like the wandering wind, its trail is almost imperceptible. To unravel it, we must trust our instincts, our hearts." He paused, recalling how, in the few seconds it had taken him to reach Mr. and Mrs. Bird's door, the delicate threads of evidence could have scattered on the breeze, and in their dispersal lay both the mystery and the challenge. I watched it all unfold at Longbottom's bedside. It began with humanity's most primal instinct, the hunger for immortality. Immortality? You mean eternal life? Exactly. That was the very frontier Broderick Bode was exploring. He worked in the Department of Mysteries, specifically the division colloquially known as the Brain Lab. But they weren't studying proteins or neurons in the usual sense. Their focus lay on the electrical pulses dancing between gray and white matter, the essence of thought itself. In the brain hall, they kept writhing specimens, disembodied brains ensnared by iridescent tendrils. When those tendrils wounded a host, only Dr. Unfavorable's forgetting ointment could erase the resulting trauma from the victim's memory. And that, believe it or not, was merely their baseline accomplishment. Their greatest breakthrough went far beyond. They discovered how to transfer a soul, personality, and all from one body to another. That was Bode's domain, yet he never realized just how vast the implications were. Only his colleague, the elderly wizard with the horn-shaped hearing aid, Melvin Jackson, truly understood the scope of their work. So they could project your thoughts into someone else, preserving your identity after death? Close, but projection isn't quite accurate. It's not an injection or a simple upload. It's a transformation, your very essence reborn in another vessel. Make the cursed man believe he's the one who cast the spell, the wizard said. You're not alone in that idea, his colleague replied. Our field doesn't rely on blunt legilimency. We steal memories as subtly as a spring breeze. Jackson stole Bode's research and perfected it. He created what he calls wedges, tiny deposits of a wizard's entire personality and memories, carved into a host's body. Once grafted, they must be tended and fine-tuned over the course of a year. Crucially, the host must have no occlumency skills. As the wedge settles, the host's thoughts and behaviors gradually become indistinguishable from the original owners. The first wizard frowned. Who's the host? Does this have anything to do with Bode's murder? Bode's death was unavoidable, the second wizard said coolly. Jackson couldn't risk anyone discovering he was inhabiting another man. As for the host, you'll recognize the name. It's Fudge. Rufus Fudge, nephew of Cornelius. He was born in December 1981, so he's just turned 12 and is now a first year at Hogwarts. The first wizard shook his head. But shouldn't he be in second year? He only turned 11 last December, his colleague explained. Since Hogwarts enrolls new students in September, this is his first term. Had he started a year earlier, I would have known. Jackson targeted him because he was the nephew of the Minister of Magic. But you and I both know Fudge stepped down last year, Ryan reminded her. Kate's eyebrows shot up. Last year? So he's already one of Jackson's ghostly victims? Not quite, yet, Ryan said with a dismissive snap of his fingers. In that instant, the crack of breaking glass sounded somewhere nearby, then faded as he waved it off. Trust me, it's under control. He hesitated, then shut his mouth. There was one crucial detail he hadn't shared. Like Bode before him, Rufus Fudge had actually been killed 2 years ago. Kate, unfamiliar with the Harry Potter universe, didn't recognize the pattern. Yet those early accidents were no flukes at all. They were part of a deliberate purge within the Ministry of Magic. Despite his frail appearance, complete with a comically large trumpet-shaped hearing aid, Jackson was in remarkably good health. He'd gone to great lengths to stage his own decline, ensuring no one would suspect him when the moment came to lay him to rest. But Voldemort's return and the ensuing political upheaval rattled him. Faced with that threat, he zeroed in on Rufus Fudge, a young, pure-blood centrist with an influential family name, figuring the public would barely mourn a prominent figure already deemed expendable. And so, Jackson struck before anyone could catch on. Chapter 7. Rumors and Reckonings. 2 years into the timeline, the long-whispered rumor finally reached the Ministry of Magic. Voldemort had returned. When Harry Potter himself confirmed the Dark Lord's resurrection, the fragile alliance between Fudge and Dumbledore shattered. According to the original chain of events, Melvin Jackson struck Fudge just after Harry's 4th year, lunging at the minister in a calculated bid to throw the wizarding world into chaos. Then, at Christmas during Harry's 5th year, Jackson sent poor Bode a gift that proved fatally deadly. Kate stared at Ryan, uncertain what he'd been up to. When he snapped his fingers and adopted that strange, triumphant tone, she guessed the answer before he spoke. "Did you crack that wedge?" she asked. Ryan fought a grin. "I did, and there's more. The Ministry's acting with unprecedented speed. We'd barely set foot back here when Aurors surrounded Jackson's house. No chase, no delay. He confessed immediately." Kate's eyes widened. So he doesn't have to prop up his wedge anymore? He thought his plan was airtight. He had only to wait for the sentence to seal his fate. "Exactly," Ryan said, shrugging. "With Azkaban shut down, there's nowhere left to send him except the new prison, the cage. And guess who's already inmate number 1 in his cell? Fudge, Umbridge, and Gilderoy Lockhart." He paused, as if savoring the irony. Cellmates at last. A heartfelt thank you to Taishi Yumiksu, Long Tianshu, and Yu Huang Dadi of Haotian Tongming Palace for their generous monthly tickets, and to all my other classmates for your recommendations and subscriptions. Chapter 67. The One Who Can't Come Back. Under the muted glow of the street lamps, 6 friends gathered on the cobblestones beside a row of strange, hovering carriages. They waved their reluctant goodbyes as Victor Krum prepared to depart. Harry broke the silence. "So you're going back to Hogwarts, Victor?" Crumb's normally impassive face softened for a moment. Not exactly, he replied. Since Durmstrang students can't stay in their castle this term, all 3 schools, Durmstrang, Beauxbatons, and Ilvermorny, have been assigned temporary lodging at Hogwarts alongside the Lycanthropy Division. Draco tugged at his scarf. In short, the other schools aren't moving into Gryffindor Tower. They're just using Hogwarts as a makeshift dorm. Ginny hid a yawn behind her hand, and Neville began to speak, only to be cut off by Ron, who barreled forward and grabbed Crumb's arm. Crumb, how am I supposed to survive without you? Ron exclaimed, I need my Victor fix. Autographs, stories, everything. Crumb's stone-cold facade cracked. Swiftly, he clamped a hand over Ron's mouth. Quiet, Ronald, he hissed. If you promise to zip it, I'll sign a few more photos for you. He glanced at Harry. I'm a world-class Quidditch star. If you two start shouting, I'll never get back to the Leaky Cauldron in one piece. The carriage's lanterns began to shimmer, its magic stirring. Crumb took a final breath, then nodded at the others. Just remember, none of us are actually living at Hogwarts. It's only temporary housing. With that, he stepped inside. The carriage lifted off, its lanterns winking out against the night sky, leaving Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and Neville standing on the cold stones, acutely aware of how much they'd miss him. There are only the professors and the headmaster teaching those wizards who've been transformed into wolves now. And that bastard Grindelwald. Crumb added under his breath, he's rumored to be studying how to turn muggles into wizards. Draco raised an eyebrow. Then what about you? Victor Crumb's expression was stiff. His face barely betrayed any emotion beyond a slight frown and a blink, but his eyes twinkled with amusement. The French witch and I covered our own travel expenses. We'll make our official entrance into the UK alongside the rest of the students. Trust me, you'll find it very interesting. Harry leaned forward, curiosity written all over his face. What is it? Tell us. Crumb shook his head, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Not a chance. I won't spoil the surprise. He reached into his robes, pulled out a handful of glossy photographs, and thrust them into Ron's hands. Here, my autograph for you. Before Ron could even thank him, Crumb turned on his heel and hurried away, vanishing into the crowd without a backward glance. Crumb, what on earth? Ron stared at the pictures, relieved to see they were all different shots, each bearing Victor's neat scrawl of, "To Ronald Weasley, best of luck." Almost at the same moment, Neville Longbottom cleared his throat. I'm off too. And with a small wave, he disappeared among the throng of witches and wizards. Harry frowned, glancing first at Ron, then Draco. Weren't we all meeting at the Leaky Cauldron? We were supposed to use the fireplace there, and flew back to Hogwarts. Isn't Crumb staying at the Cauldron as well? Draco caught Ron's eye and offered a quick shrug, punctuated by a series of urgent hand gestures that clearly meant, let's stick to the plan. Reluctantly, Harry nodded. All right, to the Cauldron then. Hopefully, we'll catch up with the others there. With that, the 3 friends threaded their way through the departing crowd, clutching trunks and owl cages, ready for whatever surprises lay ahead on their journey back to Hogwarts. Ron was still standing there, staring at the photographs in his hand like a man starved for news. Harry knew exactly why. The next morning dawned in the same familiar room. Harry rubbed the sleep from his eyes and let out a long yawn. Harry! 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 Ron's voice came thudding up the stair, each shout punctuated by a bang on the banister. What is it? Harry mumbled, reaching for his wand on the bedside table. A quick swipe passed the tip under his tongue, around his cheeks and under his eyes, banishing the morning crust, bad breath, and grease in one clean sweep. Fully awake now, he sat up. Bang! The door flew open and Ron burst in, clutching a copy of the Daily Prophet. His hair was a mess and he was still in his pajamas. Moments later, 2 more pajama-clad figures slipped in behind him, Ginny and Draco. Harry, Mom and Dad are missing, Ginny blurted, her brow furrowed with worry. She sounded as startled as she looked, while Ron and Draco exchanged knowing glances. You'll understand once you read this, Ron said, holding the Prophet aloft. Draco added with a smirk. There's also some very interesting news besides. What is it? Harry asked, snatching the paper from Ron's hand. Ginny edged closer, peering over his shoulder as the 4 of them gathered around, bracing themselves to learn what the wizarding world had to say about the Potter disappearance, and whatever else lay hidden in those headlines. Three familiar faces stared up at Harry from the newspaper. The foremost was Neville Longbottom, whom Harry had only met yesterday, sturdy yet dabbing at tears. Standing just behind Neville were two figures he recognized from the Order of the Phoenix's earliest group photo. Neville's parents, Frank and Alice Longbottom. Both still wore the pale blue pajamas of St. Mungo's Hospital, as if they'd been discharged only moments before and hadn't even had time to change. Gone were the round, cheerful faces seen in that old photo. In their place were hollowed cheeks, wild tufts of white hair, and eyes so fragile they seemed as though the slightest breeze might carry them away. The caption read, "The Awakening of the First Wizarding War's Heroes." Frank and Alice Longbottom were among the most respected Aurors of their generation and founding members of the Order of the Phoenix. After suffering the unimaginable cruelty of Bellatrix Lestrange's Cruciatus curse, they were left comatose for years. Fortunately, according to Milliam Straw, head therapist at St. Mungo's, the Longbottoms have begun to show subtle signs of improvement, small but significant steps on the long road toward recovery. St. Mungo's, closed Ward 1, was busy straightening Mr. Bode's bed, though that's a story for another time, when I heard Agnes in the next bed begin muttering to herself. Almost at once, I noticed movement from the Longbottom's roomy corner. Both Frank and Alice Longbottom were stirring. That was astonishing. For months, they'd lain side by side in perfect stillness, communicating only by gesture or squeezing each other's hands. When they did speak at all, it was only to whisper their son's name, Neville. What happened next is well known. Mrs. Augusta Longbottom arrived in a flurry to collect her daughter-in-law and son-in-law, and as they left St. Mungo's, they crossed paths with Neville, returning from a shopping trip to Diagon Alley. A photographer caught the moment, and the newspaper ran that first snapshot of the Longbottoms on the front page. In it, Neville stands tall and proud. No surprise, really. He's one of Ravenclaw's top students, widely admired for having arranged free textbooks for younger students at Flourish and Blotts just that morning. The boy's broad shoulders and confident grin say it all. I almost laughed aloud when I turned the page and saw the second picture, a family portrait taken right outside the hospital. Frank and Alice were dressed in fresh robes, their hair neatly combed, faces bright with health. Neville, looking every inch the robust young wizard, beamed between them. It was hard to believe that, only hours before, his parents had been too ill even to whisper. Yet there they stood, glowing with newfound strength and hope. Neville and his grandmother were missing from the group photograph. But Harry wasn't the least bit surprised. After all, it was a picture of the Order of the Phoenix. Dumbledore, Moody, Hagrid, Sirius, Mr. Weasley, and the others were all there, clustered around the same round table, the same half-emptied wine bottles, the same striped wallpaper Ryan had described. The only difference was that a few seats remained empty because some members had vanished or perished. On such a joyful day, Harry found it impossible not to think of them. "Harry, what's wrong?" Draco asked, frowning. He hadn't expected Harry to grow solemn so suddenly. "Nothing," Harry said, though his voice carried a distant note of sadness. He shook his head. "I was just remembering Marlene McKinnon, G. Fenwick, all the friends we've lost. It's hard not to think of them." He forced a small smile and turned back to the photograph, determined not to let his melancholy spoil the moment for everyone still here. Chapter 511, St. Mungo's Therapist Solves Murder Case. A warm glow filled the room, softened by cool blue accents on the walls and furnishings. Seated around a small table, Harry, Ginny, Draco, and oblivious to the growing tension, Ron, were all poring over the same newspaper. The three of them frowned. Only Ron remained blissfully unaware. "Heh, now you know exactly where my parents are," Ron laughed, pointing at the headline. "Shut up, Ron." Ginny and Draco snapped in perfect unison. Ron blinked, clearly mystified. He glanced at his sister, then at Harry. "What did I say?" He rubbed his head, realizing belatedly that he'd been daydreaming. Could it have been something Harry mentioned earlier? He'd missed the last sentence entirely. Harry brushed the interruption aside with a dismissive wave. "It's nothing. Ron's been zoning out since breakfast. Now, Draco, what was that interesting bit of news you wanted to show us?" Draco, arms crossed, tapped his foot impatiently. "Just turn the page." Harry sighed, flipped to the next sheet, and stopped cold. The centerpiece was a photograph of a woman with a gentle, motherly bearing. She wore an intricate filigree wreath in her hair and held a pair of steel tweezers delicately pinching a single black button. The caption beneath read, "St. Mungo's healer cracks high-profile homicide." Harry leaned closer, and even Ron, finally curious, scooted forward. The article promised every detail, how a subtle clue, a misplaced button, had led the therapist to break open an otherwise baffling murder case. In that moment, the room's earlier awkwardness was forgotten, as all four of them hungrily read on. The sallow-faced wizard lying on the bed beside her turned his head, as if he had something urgent to say. Harry cleared his throat and resumed reading. St. Mungo's Therapist Cracks Murder Case, by Rita Skeeter, Special Correspondent. In yesterday's bulletin, we told you about a strangely injured ministry clerk whose condition had stumped both healers and aurors. Today we can reveal that it was none other than Melium Straw, therapist in St. Mungo's closed ward, who unraveled the truth. But this time, Straw isn't just a gifted healer, she's our very own detective. The patient at the heart of her inquiry is Broderick Bird, a 47-year-old Ministry of Magic employee. Until recently, everyone believed Bird had been the victim of an on-the-job accident. He'd been rendered mute, abandoned by his family, and was convinced, oddly enough, that he was a teapot. Yet Melium Straw saw past the surface delusion from the moment she first assessed him. Melium has always been exceptionally perceptive, says Harvey Bonham, president of St. Mungo's and great-grandson of the famed healer Mungo Bonham. No matter how withdrawn or confused her patients seem, under her meticulous care, they find their way back to us. And this time, she knew something far darker was at play. Thanks to her determination, what appeared to be a tragic accident has now been reclassified as a cunning act of murder. Further details remain under wraps as the Auror office continues its investigation. But one thing is clear. Melium Straw's blend of compassion and cunning has turned the tide in this baffling case. Chapter 12. The Dark Charmed Button. Late one afternoon, an urgent owl arrived at the Department of Mysteries. Its message was brief but alarming. During a routine security inspection at Mr. Bode's home, a small button inscribed with dark runes had been discovered hidden beneath his pillow. Under the decisive leadership of Head of Magical Law Enforcement Amelia Bones and Minister for Magic Percy Weasley, the ministry no longer tolerated delays. Less than 20 minutes after Miss Straw filed her report, a detachment of Aurors appeared at 67 Privet Drive in London, home to 78-year-old Melvin Jackson. Auror Finny Dax, brimming with pride over the swift operation, later described their surprise arrival. Confronted so abruptly, Jackson Sr. confessed almost immediately. He admitted that his motive was envy. Mr. Bode's wreck and success had stung him. Believing his own life was drawing to a close, he'd abandoned any moral restraint and enchanted the button to harm, or at least unnerve, his rival. Because Jackson's advanced age and frailty made him vulnerable to shock, the ministry had assigned a healer to accompany the Aurors. Fitted with a discreet hearing enhancement charm to prevent any sudden noise from triggering cardiac arrest, the old man underwent a preliminary medical exam. The verdict was grim: systemic organ failure. As Dax dryly observed, even if the ministry chose leniency over prosecution, Jackson Sr. had scarcely a month left to live. What surprised everyone most was Stephen's verdict. After running the final tests, the young therapist looked up in horror. If Mr. Bode had worn that device for another 20 days, he said quietly, he would have suffered irreversible organ failure. A stunned silence fell over the room. None of them could fathom what old Jackson had in mind when he strapped that contraption to Bode's head. It was almost as if he wanted to die alongside his victim, a grotesque, twisted echo of those grand Dumbledore sacrifices they'd heard about. When Mr. Bode finally woke and recovered, he admitted he remembered almost nothing about Jackson. Ron's face darkened. And would you look at that? Rita Skeeter's spinning her usual lies, calling it a Dumbledore-style bond. It's disgusting. Why didn't Sirius do something? Harry shivered. Even now, he could feel his heart pounding. That isn't the worst part. The real killer lives on Privet Drive. Ron's eyes widened. Privet Drive? You mean Uncle Vernon's street? Exactly, Harry said. Dumbledore might have planted him there to protect me. Instead, he nearly killed Mr. Bode. Ron ran a hand through his hair. But Uncle Vernon's house is number 4. This murderer is at number 67. There's miles between them. Harry frowned at the floor, recalling a weathered old man, Melvin Jackson, he'd once seen standing near number 67. Was it really just a coincidence? Probably, Ron said, though neither of them sounded convinced. They fell into uneasy silence, both of them aware that the line between ally and enemy had never been thinner, and that even the safest streets might conceal the darkest dangers. Everyone fell silent when Draco spoke, his tone flat. Dumbledore wouldn't send someone like that to spy on you, Harry. Ron's head snapped up at the word spy, and he shot Draco a hard look, but Draco didn't even flinch. I'm serious, Draco went on. Ron's right, a surprising number of witches and wizards now live full-time in Muggle neighborhoods, for the TV, the shops, all the conveniences. Melvin Jackson's one of them. Ginny folded her arms, but her eyes were sparkling with interest. You're talking about Jackson? But I'm more concerned about Finian Dax. She paused for effect. Bill said he's a proper cad, breaks up with his girlfriends the instant trouble starts. He's a Ravenclaw, and he and some fellow named Richard discovered those grotesque hunting knives made from Dolahov's thigh bones and a handful of chewed-through rat bones. Ron sat up straighter. Oh, I remember him. Dad actually asked Bill to spend more time with Dax. Apparently the boy comes from a huge family of witches. Harry chuckled. Not beautiful witches, Ron. Dad's exact words were that Finian and Richard have plenty of female relatives who are of a marriageable age. Ron threw his hands in the air and grinned. Brilliant! Ginny exchanged a wry look with Draco, and Harry allowed himself a small smile. Harry, how do you remember it so clearly? Ginny asked, narrowing her eyes. Without warning, she pinched the soft flesh of Harry's arm, just like Mrs. Weasley used to do to Mr. Weasley. Harry yelped. Ron swallowed hard, relief washing over him that Lavender wasn't around to witness it. But Ginny grinned wickedly at Ron. And Ron, she added, I'll be writing to Lavender tonight, and I'll be sure to include these little details. Ginny, don't you dare, Ron protested, his face turning bright red. In the study at Smith Castle, Kate paced in frustration, the Daily Prophet clutched in one hand. Fleur Delacour and Penelope Clearwater sat nearby, equally annoyed. From the looks on their faces, they'd all read the morning edition. Have they conveniently forgotten about the healer and the dean? Kate demanded, waving the newspaper. And why is someone else being credited with solving the case? Penelope leaned forward, frowning. We were right there. This was our chance to live an ordinary life, and to be recognized for it. Now our work has been handed off to someone else entirely. Fleur's silver blue eyes flashed. It's as if we never existed. From beside the fireplace, Ryan gave a calm nod. I did say that the Dean of St. Mungo's would handle the formal write-up. Professor Harvey's report covered every point. Everything's been submitted. Kate let out a huff of irritation. But this was a rare opportunity for us to step into the world as ourselves. Now our role has been erased. Ryan crossed the room and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Trust me, he said quietly. The truth has a way of coming out in time. Just be patient. With a final glare at the newspaper, Kate folded it and set it on the desk. Though annoyed, she nodded slowly, willing herself to believe Ryan's words. Chapter 69, Angry Kate. So they haven't forgotten about us, Penelope said, raising an eyebrow. If Augusta and Neville Longbottom are still acting like that, doesn't the entire family know about you and Kate? Ryan ran a hand through his hair. I thought they'd all put it behind them ages ago. The Ryan they know, the therapist turned dean at St. Mungo's, might recall the name Smith, but they wouldn't know who he really was or what he did. And no one in the wider wizarding community is going to admit it was Smith who fixed everything. I assumed that part of the story had been neatly erased. But from the way you and Kate were talking earlier, Penelope pressed on, it's obvious they remember every last detail. You know how close the Longbottoms are to the Order of the Phoenix, right? And the last wizard you want poking around your business is Albus Dumbledore himself. Ryan winced, as though the very mention of Dumbledore reopened an old wound. I still can't believe I said it, he confessed. I joked to Penelope, you want to know why I steer clear of Dumbledore? Just look at me. So charming, so handsome. I'm practically a poster boy. I was terrified he'd take one look and change his mind about everything. Penelope rolled her eyes, but Ryan's expression grew serious. Bottom line, they're Longbottoms. I doubt they'll ever mention Smith outright. They've known him forever, and they'll keep that secret from me. That's right. Longbottom and Smith share the very same origin, Penelope said with a wry smile, pressing his hand against his face to mask the daydream he'd just indulged. You Brits truly are bold. Imagine, Jackson actually cursed himself. Fleur, who had been silent until now, let out a heavy sigh. He was already dying, wasn't he? So he drove a wedge between Fudge and his team, then turned on his colleagues, determined to drag everyone who knew the personality-altering magic down with him. Kate blinked in bewilderment. But didn't you notice his symptoms? Jackson's body was shutting down, organ failure, and the hex he placed on Bode did exactly the same. Fleur frowned at Kate's interruption. She'd never cared for Kate, viewing her as nothing more than Penelope's sidekick, yet always so eager to take center stage. You're missing another possibility, she snapped. Rita Skeeter reported it herself. Jackson and Bode shared a Dumbledore-esque bond. He must have wanted to die alongside his lover, at the same time and in the same way. Kate shot to her feet, indignation burning in her eyes. How dare you, a Frenchman and a charlatan, spread such rumors in my presence? An uneasy hush fell over the room as each person digested Fleur's theory and wondered just how far Jackson's scheme had truly gone. Ryan thought he'd kept it secret, at least until the day he died. Ha-ha! Dwarf Kate! Fleur! Shh! Ryan hushed Fleur with a raised middle finger, one arm wrapped firmly around Kate as she squirmed in his embrace. Across the room, Fleur shook her silvery blonde hair, hopped back onto the sofa's corner cushion, and fell silent. Kate's muffled voice squeaked from Ryan's chest. You, nasty, you disgusting, phlegm-breath bastard! Ryan stroked her back gently. Now, Kate, don't blame Fleur. How dare she tease my dear Kate? Kate inhaled sharply, her cheeks burning. Bit by bit, the stream of insults dried up under Ryan's soothing touch, though she still trembled. He let out a soft chuckle. But really, Kate, you shouldn't call Fleur sticky. You're a grown woman now, a mature adult, an elegant British lady who doesn't care what the French think. At the words mature, elegant, and British lady, Kate's resistance melted entirely. She let out a tiny sob and collapsed against him again, perfumed cheeks pressed into his shirt. Ryan wrapped her in a protective hug, his heart softening at the sight of her little frame tucked so utterly into his arms. And for the moment, that was enough peace for all of them. Fleur, sitting off to one side, shot them a look of pure disgust. Without a word, she reached Ed behind her on the bookshelf, pulled out a random volume, and began to read. Penelope shuddered involuntarily. If only Fleur's choice had been more interesting. Instead, she turned to the newspaper lying on the table, skimmed the headlines, and scoffed. St. Mungo's really can't be trusted, Penelope declared. If Ryan hadn't shown up when he did, Bode would be dead. Kate's face puffed up until her round chin seemed to graze the ceiling. Ha! Penelope St. Mungo's is ours! She retorted, pride shining in her eyes. Penelope rolled her eyes. Oui bah, it belongs to Ryan now. Shameless. But at the corner of her mouth, a sly smile betrayed her true thoughts. And Ryan hasn't said a word about it, she continued. Look, it's a hospital. That's already something. But the receptionist in the first-floor waiting room and therapist Straw had the nerve to question Ryan's judgment, even though their livelihoods depend on him. To them, Bode was just another ministry employee who got hurt on the job, a patient like any other. They pride themselves on their skill at healing, so honestly, it's no surprise they overlooked a cursed object hidden in a pillow. Fleur finally looked up from her book. A curse? She asked crisply. Not just any jinx, Penelope said, tapping the paper. This curse came straight from a senior researcher at the Department of Mysteries. She folded the newspaper patiently, as if she already had a plan forming. That's why Bode nearly didn't make it, and why St. Mungo's can't be left to run itself. The Ministry of Magic itself had decided to keep its employees' records under wraps, right down to the causes of any on-the-job injuries. When St. Mungo's took in Neville's parents, the hospital staff knew next to nothing about where their injuries had come from, or even the full details of their identities. Yet judging by the latest photographs, it's clear they've been exceptionally well cared for. Their hair has turned white, and their faces carry the hollow look of those plagued by nightmares and memory loss. but beyond that, they appear as comfortable as anyone could hope at Mungo's. That, of course, is why Mrs. Augusta isn't about to call the place into question. If St. Mungo's really did a poor job, do you think she'd willingly leave both her son and son-in-law in their care? Don't you agree, Ryan? Kate, who treats every corner of St. Mungo's as if it were her own, studied him expectantly. Ryan merely grinned, shot Penelope a quick knowing wink, and replied, "You're absolutely right. St. Mungo's couldn't be better." Chapter 70. Mr. Weasley is exhausted. Harry had expected Arthur Weasley home long before now. After all, Mr. Weasley didn't have any pressing duties that day. Molly and Bill had returned to the Burrow with the reunited Order of the Phoenix and spent the afternoon happily filling Harry in on all the news. Before leaving, they'd reminded him that Arthur needed to drop by the Ministry of Magic, but assured him he'd be back for dinner. But as evening deepened into night, well past moonrise, dinner lingered on the stove, kept warm by half a dozen tempering charms. Molly kept casting anxious glances at the great-grandfather clock in the corner. Its steady tick-tock did nothing to ease her nerves. The longer Arthur stayed away, the more she feared something had delayed him. By the time Ron finally drifted off mid-sentence, his head lolling against the table, the only sound in the burrow was the crackle of the fire. Then, with a sharp crack, the flames flared emerald green. Arthur tumbled through the hearth and landed on the rug in a tangle of robes, his ministry uniform drenched in sweat, as if he'd just sprinted a marathon. Molly and Ron sprang to their feet. Bill and Harry rushed forward too. Arthur struggled to his feet, a tired smile tugging at his lips. He didn't even pause to brush himself off before he collapsed into his chair at the table and grabbed a chicken leg, tearing into it with his bare hands. Between bites, he took a long, weary pull of pumpkin juice and sighed so deeply the whole kitchen seemed to tremble. "Ministry's in utter chaos at the moment," he panted. "The Auror office is so desperate for experienced hands, they're thinking of re-inviting Frank Longbottom and the others. I've been running myself ragged trying to keep up with it all." He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, and Molly hurried to clear his plate of cold stew so she could bring him something hot. The rest of them exchanged relieved looks. Arthur was home, at last, exhausted, but safe. Arthur Weasley leaned back in his chair and took another hearty spoonful of onion soup. "The Experimental Spells Committee and the Magic Maintenance Department are at it again," he announced, setting his spoon down with a sigh. Molly frowned. "Oh, Arthur, do tell. Who's causing trouble this time? You remember Gilbert Whymper, don't you? The fellow who seemed to delight in making everyone's life miserable. His committee is supposed to oversee the development and regulation of experimental charms. 2 years ago, he tried to haul Harry in for that red spark spell he invented." Molly bit her lip. "And what about Ron's famous smoke bottle incident? He never stood up to that, did he?" Arthur shook his head. "He didn't have the nerve. Once I took over as director, Whymper backed off, at least from Harry. But then he decided to pick on departments he'd never bothered before. His next target was the Magic Maintenance Department." Percy, sitting up at the table, raised his hand eagerly. "That's the group in navy blue robes, Dad. The ones responsible for the upkeep of the ministry itself. They choose which weather the enchanted windows display, fix spell glitches in the offices, even make sure the magical plumbing and lifts keep running smoothly." Arthur nodded. "Exactly. And apparently, Whymper thinks they're beneath him. He's been piling on inspection demands, rewriting their protocols, and generally making life miserable for people who are just trying to do their jobs." Molly exchanged a worried glance with Arthur. "That sounds like Whymper, all right. If there's misery to be had, he'll find it." Percy scowled. "I'll have a word with him myself. It's disgraceful. He's undermining the very backbone of the ministry." Arthur chuckled softly. "Be my guest, Percy. But remember, Gilbert Whymper's not exactly the sort to back down when challenged." Molly sighed, reaching across the table to give Arthur's hand a reassuring squeeze. "Well, whatever he's planning, we'll face it together, like we always do." The three Weasleys fell into thoughtful silence, bracing themselves for whatever bureaucratic battle lay ahead. Percy sighed as he set down his teacup. "I spend my days overseeing the elevators, making sure every fireplace in the Great Hall is stocked with flue powder, and handling the less magical chores, like cleaning. Mrs. Weasley smiled indulgently and handed him a generous slice of meat pie. She'd always been proud of Percy's steady Ministry of Magic position, a rock-solid job that reminded her so much of her husband's early days. Mr. Weasley leaned forward, eager to join the conversation. Speaking of the ministry, did I tell you about this fellow Wemple over in the Department of Magical Maintenance? He's been going out of his way to give Reginald Cattermole a hard time. Claims Red's weather modification charm isn't one of the standard ones and needs to be logged immediately. And that's just the start. He's been scrutinizing every single incantation Reg attempts. Fred and George's ears perked up instantly. What else did Wemple say? Fred asked, his eyes gleaming. Yeah, come on, Dad. Spill the details. George chimed in. Mrs. Weasley exchanged a puzzled glance with Harry. She couldn't understand why her mischievous twins found ministry infighting so endlessly entertaining. Harry, however, recognized their game perfectly. There was nothing the Weasley brothers loved more than a good tale of bureaucratic bungling to relish over breakfast. Mr. Weasley beamed at his boys. Well, let's see. Wemple pointed out that Reg wasn't filing his maintenance logs in triplicate, demanded to know why he used a versicolor charm on the central heating ducts instead of the approved bright warm incantation, and then accused him of unauthorized temperature variation when the greenhouse roses wilted under Reg's care. Fred and George howled with laughter. George slapped the table so hard his pumpkin juice splashed over Mrs. Weasley's spotless tablecloth. Even Percy cracked a grin, and Mrs. Weasley shook her head fondly at her son's irrepressible delight. Harry leaned back in his chair, amused by the Weasleys' breakfast ritual of trading ministry gossip. For once, he didn't mind being just another ear to their endless parade of absurd tales. Chapter 7. The Three Wings of Magical Muggle Relations. Even within the Department of Magical Accidents and Disasters, tensions simmered among three overlapping bodies: the Muggle Concerns Committee, the Muggle Liaison Office, and the Office of Misinformation. Each claimed its remit covered magical incidents affecting the non-magical world, but in practice, their duties frequently collided. 1. The Muggle Concerns Committee. A largely civilian body, the Concerns Committee never leaves its desks. Their sole mission is to devise plausible, science-based explanations for everyday magical phenomena, vanishing footprints, sudden sparks of light, or inexplicable weather patterns. By translating wizarding mishaps into natural science terms, they hope to keep Muggles comfortably ignorant of magic. Because they handle only minor, routine incidents, they seldom need to dispatch agents into the field. Number 2. The Muggle Liaison Office. By contrast, the Liaison Office is perpetually on the move. Its field agents crisscross the country on broomsticks and in enchanted vehicles, locating Muggles who have glimpsed the hidden world and erasing or modifying their memories. They also foster goodwill between wizarding communities and local Muggle authorities, guiding encounters so that both sides walk away without a hint of discord. Their hands-on approach makes them the first responders when a stray curse or runaway boggart goes awry in public. 3. The Office of Misinformation. When a magical event threatens national security or risks exposure at the highest level, it falls to the Misinformation Office to step in. Tasked with damage control on a grand scale, they consult directly with the Muggle Prime Minister's office to fabricate thoroughly non-magical cover stories, everything from freak weather anomalies to classified military tests. Their work is delicate. A misstep could spark panic, invite media scrutiny, or, even worse, alert the general public to the existence of magic. Despite these clearly defined roles, the Concerns Committee, the Liaison Office, and the Office of Misinformation often find themselves stepping on one another's toes. A simple memory wipe by Liaison might undermine the Concerns Committee's carefully constructed scientific narrative. Likewise, a misinformation directive could override the field agent's judgments. Managing these jurisdictional clashes falls to the head of the Department of Magical Accidents and Disasters, an unenviable task, given that each wing believes its own solution is the only sensible one. And so the struggle for control continues, a silent battle fought in meeting rooms, enchanted memos, and whispered phone calls, always in the service of keeping the wizarding world safely out of sight. As for the Misinformation Office, it's technically a civilian post, but with a field role. Unlike the other two agencies, whose officers work out of fixed headquarters, for example, the British Prime Minister's Muggle office, misinformation agents are expected to deploy wherever trouble arises. Of course, these are only long-standing habits. In practice, the three offices' responsibilities overlap. The real headache comes from departmental oversight. Although the Misinformation Office exercises broader powers, powers that intersect both the Department of Magical Accidents and Disasters and the Department of Biological Management and Control, it answers not to either of those bodies, but to a third, the Ministry of Magic's Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. Understandably, the Accidents and Disasters Department has been petitioning to have the Misinformation Office abolished or at least transferred into its own remit. At the same time, Biological Management and Control, unwilling to see any of its turf slip away, vigorously opposes any such handover. The result is an interminable bureaucratic tug-of-war, with the Misinformation Office caught smack in the middle. "Dad," Ginny interrupted, tilting her head, "if the Misinformation Office overlaps so much with these other departments, why on earth is it stuck under the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, a division that doesn't even seem related?" Weasley's long explanation. Mr. Weasley leaned back in his chair and gave a rueful shrug. "You have to remember that, not so long ago, wizards were officially classified as magical creatures. That old paperwork meant our Department of Magical Law Enforcement had to share responsibilities with, of all things, the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. Within DAMIC, the Muggle Mediation Committee and the Muggle Liaison Office were always squabbling over who got to handle field assignments. Believe me, I'd never understood until recently just how exhausted the director must have been, juggling all that and never having a spare moment to learn about those marvelous Muggle inventions." Percy frowned, tapping his fingers on the polished desk. "But Father, aside from the Auror office, none of those duties actually fall under our department. If the Mediation Committee or the Liaison Office needs sorting out, shouldn't their own superiors, or even the Minister of Magic, deal with it?" "That would certainly simplify matters," Arthur admitted with a sigh. "Unfortunately, our remit isn't confined to simply chasing dark wizards. We're also charged with drafting and amending the very laws, rules, and regulations that govern everyone else, from the Aurors down to Damac. Take the matter of Frank and his team. The Auror office is talking about re-inviting them, but under current regulations, that move isn't permitted. We'll have to either change the wording of the rule or issue a special exemption. And then there's Whymper's ongoing harassment of Cattermole. He hasn't technically broken any laws, so it's a nightmare to decide whether to press charges or simply warn him off." Percy's brow furrowed deeper. "We need to tighten up those statutes, Father. Otherwise, the whole system's bound to collapse into chaos." Arthur nodded, tapping a pen thoughtfully against his notepad. "I couldn't agree more, and I'm determined to see it done, no matter how long it takes." "That's clearly a problem with the system," Mr. Weasley said, his voice heavy with fatigue. "The advisory committee and I will have to oversee all the necessary changes. Right now, the Muggle Mediation Committee, the Muggle Liaison Office, and the Error Information Office are stepping on each other's toes. I'll need to redraw their responsibilities and then notify their superiors so they can schedule a joint meeting." Mrs. Weasley hurried forward and wrapped him in a warm embrace, gently resting his head against her shoulder. Harry and the others, Fred and George included, quietly turned their attention to the dishes laid out before them, each lost in thought as they picked at their food. Chapter 71. Neville's Letter. Arthur Weasley suddenly realized there was something he'd failed to mention, though, in fairness, it wasn't the thing troubling him most. He'd just finished greeting the German and Austrian Ministry of Magic officials who had come with Grindelwald, a task that, by all rights, should have been handled by the Department of International Magical Cooperation, or, at the very least, by the Minister for Magic himself. After all, the Minister's office boasts a dedicated logistics department, not to mention the offices of the Senior Deputy and Assistant Minister, each fully staffed to receive foreign dignitaries. Yet to guard against the spread of Grindelwald's dangerous ideas, the decision had been made that only someone of high enough standing, like Arthur, could oversee the reception. He shook his head at the irony of it all, and realized too late that he'd been doing it with his head buried in his wife's arms. "Arthur, hey!" Molly chided softly, but her tone was more amused than annoyed. A rosy glow bloomed across her cheeks, matching her husband's receding hairline, and she cleared her throat. "The kids are still here, you know." Arthur blinked, sat up, and gave her a sheepish grin. Molly couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. "Honestly, Arthur Weasley," she said, shaking her head, "must you always fall asleep at the worst possible moment?" He mumbled an apology, reached for her hand, and prepared himself for the rest of the evening's formalities, this time fully awake. The long, rectangular table of the Gryffindor common room had fallen into an awkward silence. One by one, students began to clear their throats and shift in their seats. Finally, Draco Malfoy stood abruptly. "I'm off," he announced, and without another word he slipped away through the portrait hole. "Me too," came a second voice, followed quickly by, "I'm absolutely stuffed." As if following a cue, the rest of the first years rose and disappeared upstairs, leaving only Harry at the table, finishing the last of his stew. Moments later, Harry padded down the corridor to the third-floor landing, where Ron Weasley was standing, literally cradling half a dozen still-warm meat pies. "Harry, mate, open up. I can't carry these in any further by myself." Draco appeared beside them, arms folded with a dismissive smirk. "It's past curfew. Why don't you two go back to your dorms? Like Bill and Charlie are doing already." Ginny, leaning against the wall, rolled her eyes, and Fred and George even trotted off without complaint. A muffled bang from 2 floors up cut her off. A blast of charred air and a spray of confetti trickled down the stairwell. "Fred, George, what on earth are you two up to this time?" Mrs. Weasley's voice rang out, livid and echoing down the staircase. Mr. Weasley hurried into view, looking abashed. He'd just convinced his twins to focus on their end-of-summer homework this afternoon, only to find their corridor in ruins. "Nothing, Mum," George called, ducking behind a mattress that had somehow been propelled from their room. "We're just practicing a new light spell. Professor Dumbledore suggested it might brighten the hallways." "Dumbledore suggested no such thing," Mrs. Weasley snapped. "And even if he had, it certainly didn't include detonations." From the 4th floor, Bill and Charlie's footsteps drifted down. Bill gave Ron an almost apologetic shrug. Charlie just sighed. Mrs. Weasley threw up her hands. "The term starts tomorrow. Who's responsible for this fiasco?" George pointed a greasy thumb at Ron. "It's all Ron's fault." "Yes," Fred echoed, straightening the scorched hole in the corridor wall. Ron's face turned as red as his hair. Harry exchanged a helpless look with Ginny. It was going to be a very long night. He said Crumb is going to compete too. "I'm so nervous." George and Fred spoke at once. "If we don't practice our magic every night before bed, there's no way we can sleep," Fred added. Before they could continue, Percy's voice rang out from the landing. "They're lying through their teeth. They're up to their usual tricks, trying to churn out enough goods to hawk at other schools." "You're slandering us," George shot back. "Percy," Fred muttered, "you've never liked us." Footsteps thundered down the stairs. "Oh no," George hissed. The twins dove for cover behind Harry's bedroom door just as Mrs. Weasley stormed by. "I can't sleep," Ron moaned, pressing a hand to his yawning mouth. "Even if I yawned 100 more times, I still wouldn't doze off. I'd much rather hear Fred get a good stern talking to." He shoved his half-eaten pie onto Harry's desk and leaned against the doorframe, eyes gleaming. Harry watched him, a mixture of amusement and dismay on his face. Only Ron would give up a midnight snack just to see Fred in trouble. Draco Malfoy scowled at Ron. "If I were Fred and George," he sneered, "and I found out you had anything to do with this, I'd sooner watch their little empire dry up than sell so much as one of your shoddy smoke bombs." Ron's cheeks flamed. Beside Harry, Ginny said nothing, but Ron caught the sharp gleam in her eyes. She agreed with Draco. "I spent all summer in their workshop, perfecting those smoke bombs," Ron shot back defensively. "I didn't even have a moment to hang out with Harry. By now, there's more than enough stock for both Fred and George to sell. If you're hearing explosions in George's room, it must be their own new creations, nothing to do with me. And, for the record, The instant something went wrong, you two were ready to pin it on me." He backed away from the door, indignant, chin jutting. Then something on Harry's unmade bed caught his eye. He pointed. "Harry, what's that on your pillow?" Harry leaned forward and followed Ron's finger. "Is that a letter?" "From whom?" Ron stepped toward the bed, his pace even quicker than Ginny's. Both of them now crowded around Harry's pillow, eyes fixed on the crisp parchment half hidden beneath his pillowcase. What could be inside? Ron's tall frame pressed up against Harry's back, and because he was almost a head taller, he could easily peer at the letter clutched in Harry's hand. "Dear Harry, get away from my boyfriend," Ginny snapped the moment Ron read the greeting. "You've got a girlfriend, Ron Weasley." She reached out, seized the back of his collar, and yanked him off Harry. Draco Malfoy strolled past them, smirking. "Really, Weasley, you ought to learn some boundaries," he drawled. He had never cared for Ron's habit of clinging to Harry, especially now, when Ron was supposed to be a loyal supporter of Dumbledore, as well as a proud Englishman. Ron rubbed his neck where Ginny had grabbed him. "What's wrong with being close to my best friend? And Ginny, don't start!" He shot Draco a glare. "I didn't expect you to join in." "Suit yourself," Draco shrugged. "But speaking of the letter, who's it from?" Harry tilted the parchment so they could all see. "It's Neville." "Neville?" Ron straightened, interest piqued. "Is he inviting us to his house or something?" Harry shook his head in mild surprise. "No, he's coming here. He said he'd be here any minute." For a moment, the three of them stared at him. Then Ron's jaw dropped. Ginny's eyes went wide. Even Draco, a notorious master of indifference, let out a low whistle. "What?" they all exclaimed in perfect unison. "Isn't this the nursery wing of the burrow?" Ron grinned as he settled onto the sofa, patting the cushion beside him. Harry and Draco exchanged uneasy looks. "What's wrong with it?" Ron shrugged. "If I were Neville, I'd love being stuck at home with my parents all day." Draco tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Let me see that letter." "Show me," Ginny declared, spreading the parchment flat on the low table and casually nudging Ron's half-eaten pie aside. Ron and Draco leaned in, peering at the elegant handwriting. "Dear Harry, it's been 23 hours since we last saw one another, and I imagine you've already read in the Daily Prophet that my parents are awake again. Last night, Ron's mum and dad, along with Professor Dumbledore and a few others, came to visit us. They talked nearly all evening, and the name Grindelwald came up more than once. It seems he's infiltrated Durmstrang under the guise of a visiting professor. They also asked about you. Apparently Grindelwald has taken a very peculiar interest in you. Moody reckons he's jealous. Nobody has ever held Dumbledore's attention quite like you have, not even Newt Scamander. On a brighter note, Mum and Dad have resumed their duties as Aurors and are busier than ever. With term starting soon, Mrs. Slytherin has kindly offered for me to stay with her until I return to school. Your friend, Neville Longbottom, Ron, whistled softly. Sounds like Grindelwald's up to something nasty. Draco's pale eyes narrowed. That Grindelwald fellow is definitely trouble. He actually targeted Harry, Ron burst out, his voice edged with anger before Ginny, his normally unflappable girlfriend, could even speak. A flicker of excitement and concern danced across her face as she hesitated, searching for the words to bridge the sudden tension. Harry stood his ground, his dark hair falling in his eyes as he met Ron's gaze with quiet resolve. The chilly evening air felt thick around them, as though the very shadows were holding their breath. Ginny stepped forward, her hand brushing Harry's sleeve in a gesture of solidarity. "We're right behind you," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline prickling her skin. Harry offered her a small, grateful nod. Ron clenched his fists, chest heaving. They've picked the wrong person to mess with tonight. In that moment, the three of them formed an unbreakable front, friendship and loyalty their greatest defense against whatever lay ahead. Special thanks to Taishi and Gugugwa for their generous monthly support, and heartfelt gratitude to all other students for your recommendations and subscriptions. Your encouragement keeps us going. Chapter 72. Ron's Suspicion. Lately, Ron had been feeling off. While waiting for Neville to arrive one afternoon, he realized that Ginny had taken an unprecedented leave of absence from the Quibbler, claiming she wanted to spend more time with Harry. But Ginny wasn't one to idle her days away. No matter how absorbed she seemed in work or errands, The moment Ron drew near, she would vanish and reappear at Harry's side. It didn't make sense, and Ron found himself watching her more closely than ever. Now that the smoke bottle project was wrapped up in the early weeks of summer, he and Harry had plenty of free time to hang out together. This only confirmed his suspicions. Ginny's behavior was neither a trick of the eye nor a fluke. Ron had always believed time would smooth everything over, just as it had when Harry first returned home. Even if Draco refused to explain what was going on, Ron was sure that eventually everything would settle into place. He was wrong. Elsewhere in the burrow, a slow, persistent clanging drifted down from the attic. In his chamber, Draco Malfoy winced as a ghoul on the top floor rattled the pipes with renewed vigor. His cheeks burned. He tugged at his robes, smoothing out wrinkles and tugging the fabric to cover pale skin that peeked out from beneath his sleeves. With each metallic thud above him, he fought the urge to shift, desperate to hide his secret from prying eyes. And all the while, Ron's uneasy thoughts about Ginny continued to churn below stairs, haunted by questions he wasn't yet ready to ask. Draco's eyes flashed in annoyance as he slammed the door shut behind him. "Ron, are you out of your mind?" he demanded, pacing the cramped room. "I'm not crazy," Ron protested, hands braced on his hips. "Something's wrong with Harry. Since Neville showed up 2 days ago, Harry's completely changed. He hasn't had one of his random makeout sessions with Ginny. He's been vanishing all day, sneaking off into the hills and woods with Neville. Who knows what they're up to out there? I'm telling you, something's off." He glanced pleadingly at Draco. "I need your help. I hate to admit it, but when it comes to scheming and knowing people, you're the one to talk to." Draco folded his arms and let out a slow, mocking clap. "You and Ginny really are cut from the same cloth." "What does that mean?" Ron asked, rubbing the back of his neck. Draco gave him a pitying look. "You haven't put 2 and 2 together? Remember how Ginny tried to manipulate Harry? Subtle suggestions, half-truths, just like Dumbledore did to Grindelwald." Ron's eyes widened. Then he slapped his thigh. "Blimey, Ginny would never stoop that low." Draco arched an eyebrow. "So you're different? My suspicions are perfectly reasonable. Think back to your Hogwarts years. Patterns repeat themselves." "Remember?" Draco inclined his head at Ron's question, playing along even though he didn't actually believe the theory. He was more interested to see how far Ron would take it. "That's right," Ron pressed on. "You might not have noticed. After all, you're not Harry and Neville's roommate, but I am. Ever since we talked about Neville's size changes, Harry's been acting strange. He started slipping away after dinner and returned to the dorm late at night, laughing and talking with Neville. Their friendship just shot up out of nowhere, and it kept up until the end of the term." Draco had come expecting a bit of fun, another wild idea from Ron, but as Ron continued, his expression grew more serious. "And don't you find it odd," Ron went on, "that even after Neville's parents got better, Neville still chose to bunk with Harry? Parents, no matter how busy, always come home at night. Why send Neville to our place? Are his parents as swamped as my dad?" "Exactly," Ron exclaimed. "Think about Mr. Weasley. He's never that tied up." Draco nodded eagerly. He'd admit, the theory was absurd, but the way Ron laid it out made Draco almost wonder if there was something to it after all. Ron's eyes narrowed as he stared at Draco. "He's been vanishing with Hermione at every opportunity," he murmured. "There's only one conclusion." Before Draco could respond, the portrait hole slammed open with a fierce bang. Ginny stormed in, her voice cracking on a single explosive declaration. "Neville Longbottom had an affair with Harry Potter." Ron gaped. He'd never seen anyone's hair stand on end until now. Ginny's flaming red curls whipped wildly around her head, as though aflame themselves. Draco's hand flew to his brow where cold sweat had formed. "Ginny, calm down," he said quickly, stepping forward. "Ron and I will sort this out." "Sort what out?" Ginny's eyes blazed. Draco swallowed hard. He had a sinking feeling that any wrong word might get him hexed to next week. High in the mountains, 2 figures whirled through the air like drifting maple leaves caught in a gust. They smashed through treetops and tumbled over clumps of grass before springing apart again. Neville Longbottom panted, one hand braced on his sword's hilt. Around him, what had once been a lush meadow lay scoured and scarred, patches of bare earth, trails where bodies had been dragged. His shirt was torn away, and his bare torso glistened with sweat under the unforgiving sun. He drew a shuddering breath, preparing himself for whatever, or whoever, came next. Harry lay flat on the scorched earth, one hand shielding his eyes from the relentless sun, the other still gripping his massive bladeless sword. His black robe was tossed over a branch 10 feet away. He felt a flush of disbelief. After absorbing the red beast face just 2 days ago, he'd been certain no wizard in the world, aside from Ryan, could match him in raw physical power. Neville's unexpected strength had shaken him so badly he dismissed the sudden rush of energy as a mirage. "Gonna come at me again?" Neville asked, holding his wand between his teeth while a clear stream of water arced from its tip. Harry pushed himself up on one elbow and studied Neville. Every sinew on Neville's arms and shoulders stood out in rippling definition, as if Ryan had specifically crafted a set of spells to build muscle rather than sharpen a blade. Harry frowned. That meant Neville's magic had nothing to do with a sword at all, and perhaps everything to do with raw, unleashed power. Ever since Harry swallowed the potion, altered his blood, reforged his heart, absorbed another identity, and assimilated Voldemort's powers, he'd never reached this level of mastery. Yet here was Neville, relying solely on his mysterious sword path, blazing past him. "The sword way never falters," Neville shouted, muscles rippling. "With this strength, I can wield any blade. With this physique, I can synchronize perfectly with its edge. And with this magic, I can cleave through every spell." He barely finished speaking before springing into the air, brandishing a massive, bladeless sword. Below him, water shot upward in an unbroken column from Harry's wand, which was buried handle-deep in the earth. With a feral roar, Neville brought his great sword down through the torrent, severing the water in midair. It split neatly in two, the smooth, flat face of the cut hanging like an invisible barrier that halted the jet's upward momentum. Water exploded outward in glittering shards, forming a fountain of spray. In that moment, both Harry and Neville, bare-chested and drenched, stood enveloped in a fine mist, the echo of Neville's triumph ringing in the air. Sunlight sparkled through the rising mist, painting fleeting rainbows across the air. When the cool droplets touched their sunburned skin, Harry and Neville couldn't help but cry out in surprise and delight. They exchanged a grin that said more than words ever could. Everything was perfectly clear to both of them. Chapter 516, Unresolved Doubts. Everything we've seen so far came from Harry's point of view, but Ron and Draco have their own take on events. It began the evening. Draco vowed to help Ginny catch her adulterer in the act. Backed by Draco's scheming and Ron's hesitant support, Ginny decided the boldest course was the simplest one: confront Harry face to face. Draco had learned that Harry and his friends had taken refuge in a remote mountain ravine, an uncharted hollow ringed by jagged peaks, nearly impossible for muggles to stumble into. Ginny recognized the spot immediately. As a child, she'd tagged along with her brothers on the long trek there. Hidden among the pines was a secluded hot spring, where on one ill-fated afternoon she'd come upon two figures, bare-chested, enmeshed in mist and rainbow spray, wearing nothing but satisfied smiles. The grass at their feet had borne silent witness to their closeness, every crushed blade marking a betrayal etched forever in Ginny's memory. Now, flanked by a smug Draco and a nervously fidgeting Ron, she pushed through the last scrub of undergrowth into the clearing. "Harry Potter!" Her voice shattered the hush of the mountains. She held her wand with both hands, arms straight, lips white around the words. "How dare you!" Harry sprang from the steaming pool, shirt half unbuttoned, droplets of water tracing rivulets down his chest. His face went pale as he realized who stood on the bank. "Ginny," he began, voice thick with shock. Ron swallowed, glancing between them. "Gin, this isn't exactly how it looks." "It looks exactly how you remember," Ginny shot back, eyes blazing. She took a trembling step forward, wand unwavering. "If you'd really needed someone, you could have come to me. Why did you hide?" Harry's shoulders slumped, guilt and confusion warring in his expression. Draco, standing just behind Ron, allowed himself a small, triumphant smirk. The three of them, Harry frozen, Ron unsettled, Draco triumphant, hung suspended in the silver mist of the spring. Only Ginny moved, her wand still trained on Harry's heart, demand and devastation burning in her eyes. Silence fell heavier than any spell. Then, at last, Harry whispered, "Ginny, I'm sorry. Please, let me explain. But Ginny only shook her head. I think I already know what happened. She didn't lower her wand. Not yet. Not until she heard every word. Ron's voice was urgent as he stepped in front of Draco. Even if you still haven't found me, why are you wearing the trousers Ginny gave you? You can take them off. There's no one here to see. Draco bristled, then drifted several paces away. Earlier, Ron's logic had seemed airtight, but the longer they'd wandered these empty halls, the more Draco's doubts grew. That figure he'd glimpsed looked exactly like Dumbledore. Spotless robes, unscathed trousers. Maybe it really was the headmaster practicing spells, not some enemy lie in wait. Before Draco could settle his thoughts, Neville shifted his weight, and with a loud crack, the flagstone beneath his left foot gave way. A circular trapdoor yawned open, and a cloaked figure sprang up beside him, lunging for his wand. Neville yanked free, whirled, and had his own wand drawn in one smooth motion, so fast that Ron and Draco barely had time to gasp. "Who are you?" Neville demanded, his wand aimed at the newcomer's chest. Ginny, heart-pounding, raced forward. "What's the matter with you?" she snapped at Neville. "You'd rather point your wand than ask why he lied to my brother? Or are you just flexing your muscles to charm men?" She swung her wand toward Neville, fingers tightening on the hilt. Then, in a heartbeat, her temper snapped back to reason. She exhaled, lowered her wand, and forced herself to think before unleashing any hex. In that charged silence, all five of them, Ginny, Ron, Draco, Neville, and the silent stranger, stood frozen, each waiting for the other to make the next move. There was no rush of air, no tremor beneath their feet, not even the faintest whisper of movement. Yet, in the blink of an eye, Harry vanished from his spot and reappeared behind Ginny, arms wrapping her in a firm, silent embrace. The Phoenix's magic cloaked his approach in complete stealth, lending him an almost preternatural grace. Nothing like Neville, whose every step seemed to thunder. "Let go of me," Ginny snarled, wrenching Harry's arms away. He spun to face Ron, confusion written across his features. "What's wrong? Are you kidding me?" Ron shot back. "You still don't get it? You're engaged to Ginny, Harry. Our Weasleys aren't toys for you to play with." Draco leapt to his feet, silencing Ron with a single, steely glance. Turning to Harry, he spoke in a low, steady voice. "Ron remembered how you and Neville used to sneak out at night at Hogwarts and then return together at dawn. Since Neville arrived here, you've slipped right back into that same schedule. It's made Ron and Ginny suspect there's something more going on between you and Neville than friendship." The words landed like a jolt. Harry's mind raced as the clues fell into place. Nearby, Neville sagged visibly, sliding his wand tip down into his pocket in a quiet admission that they'd been discovered. Neville stood a few paces away, his wand covered in mud from the recent dueling exercise. With his left hand, he pressed his index and middle fingers together, as if gripping an invisible blade. In one swift, fluid motion, he swept the muddied wand, like a surgeon's scalpel, clean. All traces of dirt vanished instantly, revealing the wand's smooth, polished finish. Harry grinned as he watched. "See that? We've been practicing with Neville, but his magic is ridiculously powerful. Unless you've trained in Fenrir's incarnation, or you're naturally gifted, like me." He shot Draco a playful look, noting that Draco was the only one who still hadn't grasped just how formidable Ryan's students could be. "You'll never keep up." He scooped up Ginny in his arms and gently tossed her toward Neville. "Look closely, Ginny," he called. "You need to see his technique." Ginny fluttered down beside Neville, her eyes wide with curiosity. Behind them, Ron leaned forward, brow furrowed. "What exactly is that spell?" Neville hesitated. He hadn't expected this question, and he certainly didn't know that Ron already understood the answer, having witnessed Ryan's power firsthand on their lunar mission. Harry caught Ron's puzzled expression and winked. "Neville here is gifted," he said quietly. "That's just another way of saying he's mastered Ryan's style of magic." At Harry's words, Ron's eyes widened in recognition. Ginny fell silent, mesmerized by Neville's calm, confident posture. Neville opened his mouth to fill in the rest, something about Ryan, but unexpectedly found himself at a loss for words. Instead, he glanced around at his friends, Harry, Ron, Ginny, and even Draco, with a flicker of suspicion, as if the truth weighed heavier than any spell he could cast. "Someone here doesn't actually know Ryan's true identity," Harry said quietly, glancing around the room. Or we're being magically monitored. You see, Ryan's file is enchanted. Anyone who hasn't been formally introduced to him can't even speak his name while he's in earshot. Only those of us who already know him can talk about him freely. Draco's dark eyes narrowed as he studied the three Gryffindors and Ginny Weasley. Why do I get the feeling you're all hiding something from me? He asked, sounding more like an accusation than a question. Neville grinned at Draco, his expression almost conspiratorial. Because Draco doesn't know Ryan, he said. None of us were allowed to mention him around you. 10 minutes later, the group's attention had narrowed to Ron. He had been the one to spread the initial rumor about Ryan's existence, an entirely baseless tale, as Harry and Neville were now fuming to discover. Honestly, Ron, what were you thinking? Harry demanded, voice tight with anger. Neville shot his old friend a glare so fierce it might have turned him to stone. Draco shifted uncomfortably. He still felt foolish for falling for Ron's story in the first place. Ginny stood apart, her arms folded, eyes flicking between her brother and Harry. The malicious rumor that Harry and Neville were somehow more than friends had set her nerves on edge. And now this talk about Ryan? She couldn't help wondering if Ron was really trying to protect Harry or if there was something more complicated going on behind his clumsy facade. She recalled Ron's strange invitation from earlier. If you really want to know the truth, Harry, you know where to find me. Ginny frowned. Ron might lack emotional subtlety, but that line hinted at intentions deeper than anyone gave him credit for. As the room grew tense, with unspoken questions, Ginny resolved that she'd be the one to figure out exactly what was going on, both with Ryan and with her own brother. Ron felt a sudden visceral jolt, an instinct so old it felt almost preternatural. He turned and met Ginny's eyes. He wasn't usually good at reading people, but now her expression was painfully clear. Doubt, confusion, a flicker of hurt. Ron's thoughts snapped back to Draco's words in the room earlier, and his chest tightened. Ginny, he began, voice low and strained. You're not seriously believing what Draco said about Harry and me, are you? His face betrayed him, hurt mixed with anger and a dash of disbelief. Ginny swallowed hard. I don't know what to think anymore, she admitted, eyes darting away. Draco, pausing a few steps behind Ron, looked over his shoulder and let out a soft chuckle. Harry, standing beside Ron, rubbed his chin in mock contemplation. Honestly, Ginny, I think you've got it all wrong. Draco and I were just having a laugh. That whole rumor about me and Ron being, he gestured vaguely between them, a thing? Pure fantasy. Ron's own mind at work. Across the room, Neville, who had been leaning against the fireplace, recalled the intensity of Ron's stare when he'd glanced at him earlier, wondering what Ron saw in him that merited such a look. Ginny pressed a hand to her forehead. And what about what you just told Harry? If you really want me, you can come find me? Ugh, she said, sounding simultaneously exasperated and embarrassed. Draco grinned. Come on, everyone knows Ron and Harry are inseparable. Neville chimed in with a teasing grin. I've even seen them sharing a bed at Hogwarts. Ron insisted it made more sense. Especially when nothing else felt right, Draco finished with a smirk. Classic Weasley, always sticking close to the chosen one. Ron's face flushed. He opened his mouth to protest, but Ginny held up a hand, eyes glistening. The room fell silent for a moment, the echo of Draco's teasing and Harry's amusement hanging in the air. Ginny looked at Ron, searching his features for the truth, hoping he would finally tell her what she most needed to know. Chapter 74, The Root of It All. Everyone quickly dropped the subject of Ron. No matter how odd he could be, at least Harry was normal, and Ron had Lavender as his girlfriend. His private life wasn't their concern. Instead, the whispers shifted to Neville. Nobody believed his excuse for turning up unannounced at the Burrow. That, they decided, was the real mystery. And so the silly accusations began. All the way home, Neville evaded every pointed question with nervous mumbles and half-smiles, refusing to give a straight answer. By the time they reached the garden, they were barely inside the front gate when a frantic flurry of feathers caught their attention. Juvijun, the round, slate-gray owl Sirius had given them, was darting about in wild circles, shrieking in alarm. Its plumage stood on end like a quill-covered hedgehog, and its cries were so sharp they made everyone wince. Harry peered through the chaos and spotted the object of Juvijun's pursuit, a small, mud-caked creature bolting across the lawn like a wingless potato on legs. He recognized it immediately. One glance confirmed it was a goblin. No more than 10 inches tall, its little hoof-like feet clattered against the cobblestones as it raced for safety. It skidded sideways, dove headfirst into a lone Wellington boot by the door, and vanished inside. Juvijun didn't hesitate. She shoved her entire head into the boot in a desperate bid to capture her prize. From within came the strange, high-pitched cackling of the goblin, amplifying the sense that something unusual, something rather important, was happening under the surface of this quiet evening. "Go on, Juvijun. This isn't the place." Ron hurried to the door and, seizing the creature by one leg, hauled it into the hallway. The moment Juvijun recognized its real master, it erupted into wild cawing, wings beating so furiously the walls trembled. Every few seconds it thrust its beak, still streaked with dust from the floor, right into Ron's face. "Clean yourself up." Ron tapped the pocket of his robe with his wand. Instantly, a beam of silvery magic shot out, striking Juvijun's plumage and banishing every speck of dust. Confident the bird was spotless, Ron held his face forward and let Juvijun preen him one last time. "You really are full of energy," he laughed, releasing the bird's leg. With an affectionate peck to his finger, Juvijun let out a triumphant squawk and took off down the corridor. "Nothing like scabbers," Ron murmured, reaching into another pocket. He produced a plump, snoozing rat and cradled it in his hand, gently stroking its round belly. Scabbers, the eldest member of the Weasley household, was Ron's first true pet. He often slipped him out of his robes for a little company, and by now everyone at the burrow expected exactly this sort of break. After all, Ron had reminded them more than once how precious Scabbers was to him. Errol's part of the family. Juvichan was delivered by Sirius. Scabbers is all I've got. "How old is he anyway?" Harry asked, bending to stroke the rat's scruffy gray fur as he glanced down. "Don't ask me," Ron replied with a shrug. "He's ancient, Percy's old pet. He must have some odd magical blood in him to live this long." Harry mused. "Look at that sheen. If he hadn't lost a toe, he'd look like a brand new mouse. Kind of like my Lef at home, amazing at hide-and-seek, disappears the moment you turn your back." Neville winced at the mention of Lef. His own rat was back in Devonshire, and with the Weasley cottage so remote, surrounded by woods, hills, and moors, he hadn't dared bring the poor thing to Hogwarts for fear it might wander off. Ginny, ever ready with a quip, seized the opportunity. "So, Neville," she said, nudging him, "you've been keeping any secret magic stunts from your mum and dad, haven't you?" Neville's face flamed. Memories of accidental charms and frantic cover-ups with his parents danced before his eyes. Before he could protest, he found himself nodding. Ginny gave an approving clap. "Oh, this is priceless. Your secret's safe with us, right?" Theirs laughed, and Neville let out a relieved sigh, managing a crooked grin. "Right, mum's the word." Harry shook his head in mock exasperation. "Fine, but only if you promise to tell us about any new rat-related escapades." With that, their laughter trailed down the corridor as they continued swapping stories of magical mischief and beloved pets. Ron burst into triumphant laughter. "Neville, you should have told us sooner. No wonder you ended up at our place. Practicing magic." He scooped Scabbers out of his roommate's pocket and, almost unconsciously, ruffled the rat's fur with the same hand that had just brushed one of Scabbers' most sensitive spots. "If I saw my own kid running around shirtless all day, swinging a sword, I'd start to think he'd lost his marbles," Ron went on, grinning. "And if I couldn't keep an eye on him myself, I'd have someone reliable do it. The Weasleys are perfect. Loads of kids, plenty of prefect experience, and my dad's in the Order of the Phoenix. Plus, you've already got me and Harry as your roommates." Harry gave a slight nod. He knew there was more to Neville's secret practice than Ron realized. Neville always surrounded himself with a swarm of billywig beetles when he trained. Their stings caused uncontrollable levitation for days, and in severe allergic cases, could lift someone off into the sky forever. Harry had been waiting for the right moment to warn his friend how dangerously close to the edge Neville really was. "You're not seriously going through with this, are you?" Draco's voice pitched higher than he intended. "Do you want your parents to find out?" Neville ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "Believe me, it's worse than you think. Mum and Dad only woke up yesterday. What kind of excuse could I possibly give them that would make them pack us off somewhere else first thing tomorrow? Even if the place is perfectly safe, they wouldn't have time or trust to send us alone. He closed his eyes, and the present faded as memories of the past 3 days surged forward. The first evening after his parents' return was almost dreamlike. A warm summer breeze drifted through the open windows as the front door banged shut behind them. For the first time in years, the seldom-used house buzzed with laughter and chatter. Neville's mother slipped off her coat, smoothing down a simple cotton dress rather than her usual elaborate robes. His father cracked jokes as he unpacked, and even Grandma surprised him. She'd traded her moth-eaten furs and specimens of dead eagles for something far less ostentatious. But beneath the joy lay something uneasy. Neville had crept to the landing, drawn by soft, urgent voices in Dumbledore's study. He caught fragments, secret missions, dangerous creatures, plans that could change everything. When a familiar cough gave him away, he bolted for his room and slammed the door behind him. 30 minutes ticked by, without so much as a call of his name. Only then did he let his shoulders drop. He peeled off his damp robe, leaving on nothing but a pair of shorts against the rising summer heat, and settled cross-legged on the wooden floor. Around him, hundreds of billywig beetles, each almost a foot long, with shells the color and sheen of polished jade, whirred in tight circles. Their wings sang a low, hypnotic hum. This was Neville's refuge, the one place where he felt he could steer the chaos in his mind. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began the intricate dance of his daily practice. Draco's voice, softer this time, brought him back to the present. "Neville?" He opened his eyes, determination stealing his features. Whatever lay ahead, he wasn't about to let fear or his parents' protection stand in his way. He set aside the massive, bladeless sword that he normally kept across his lap. Yet the scorching summer heat, his parents' triumphant homecoming, and the astonishing news they brought crashed into his heart like boulders. The indigo calm he'd cultivated, the strange sword etched with flowing cloud seal patterns in his mind, grew hazy under the onslaught of these emotions. Then his mother flung open the door. Her startled cry, combined with his own frayed nerves, sent his prized box of billywig beetles into a frenzy. The insects swarmed out and stung him in an instant. A wave of otherworldly euphoria washed over him, erasing every ache and worry, and he collapsed. Just before he lost consciousness, he saw his mother's face, taut with fear and sorrow, and heard a gruff voice murmur, "I've seen this reaction before. Professor Kelburn swears by those little creatures to drive away any malady. One sting, and you forget every physical and mental trouble." When he next opened his eyes, he was back at the burrow and propped up by Hagrid himself. The half-giant's gentle hand rested on his shoulder. "Easy now," Hagrid rumbled. "I've taken your billywigs for safekeeping, but don't fret. I'll sneak you into the cabin after term starts so you can get them back." Chapter 75. Hagrid's Sudden Visit. "I'm pretty sure this was all Dumbledore's doing," Draco began, folding his hands and resting his crossed fingers on his knee as he sat cross-legged. "Playing with billywigs has become a craze among young wizards in Australia. You hear about kids floating off after getting stung too many times. It ties in with the report you mentioned. Dumbledore wants Harry to know that Grindelwald has fixated on him and that he'd better watch his back. Neville, you've really stepped into it this time." Draco closed his eyes, studying the ceiling as if weighing his next words. "But I refuse to believe Neville's parents sent him here because of some harmless fad. They're stuck in their old-fashioned ways and doubtless think he's a bore, so they shipped him off to Hogwarts. Now, about this Grindelwald. Who is he exactly? In terms of ideology, he might be more extreme than Voldemort ever was. But in raw power, can he truly measure up to you-know-who?" Harry snorted. "I'm the boy who defeated Voldemort," he said, eyes flashing. "I'm no timid sparrow that bolts at the first sign of danger. Why on earth should I be afraid of Grindelwald?" Draco inclined his head, a faint smile on his lips. Ron, ever Harry's staunch defender, bristled. "Well, you can admire him all you like, Draco," he shot back, "but don't expect me to keep quiet about it." Neville sighed and glanced around the burrow's bustling kitchen. Staying here was a world apart from being stuck at home with Mum and Dad. though he still flinched at the memory of the night his mother discovered him practicing spells. Her face had gone pale as she tore down the row of candy wrappers he'd carefully stuck to his bedroom wall, proof of his stealthy raids on Fred and George's sweet shop samples. Before he could sink any deeper into his memories, Percy's sharp voice rang out. "Oi, you lot! Get over here and help with these dishes." Neville turned to find Percy planted beside an overflowing sink, arms folded, glaring straight at Ron. He made no move to summon Ginny, his favorite sister, and certainly wouldn't dream of ordering Molly or Auntie down to wash plates. Harry, Draco, and Ron exchanged reluctant glances under Percy's unblinking stare. "All right," Neville muttered, stepping forward. "Here we go again." With a collective groan, the three boys headed for the sink, ready to endure another round of Weasley chores. The moment Neville's thought registered, Ron stomped forward, muttering a curse under his breath, and Percy gave him an approving nod, quite proud of his brother's flair for dramatic timing. Harry followed Ron's gaze to a colossal armchair in the corner, large enough to seat half a dozen Rons at once, perhaps even enough room for him and Ginny to roll around together on its plush cushions. "Who on earth needs a chair that big?" Harry muttered, squinting at Draco, who simply arched an eyebrow in amused disdain. Then Neville's face lit up. "Hagrid!" "Oh," Harry said, realization dawning. "Hagrid's coming to lunch, of course." He glanced at the grandfather clock tucked in the corner. The Weasley family clock, each hand labeled with a family member's name, showed Bill, Charlie, and Arthur all at work, though exactly where they were remained something of a mystery. 7 of us, including Hagrid, Harry murmured. "So, no Fred and George?" He spun around to address Ginny, Draco, and Neville, who were clustered behind him. Just then, Ron brandished his wand. Silverware, knives, forks, spoons began to orbit his plate like tiny moons around a planet, settling neatly into place at his setting. In the center of the room, Percy waved his own wand in careful, practiced arcs. The long dining table and half a dozen chairs rose off the floor and shimmied in perfect formation toward the open French doors that led into the garden. Harry watched it all, a smile creeping across his face. At the Burrow, even something as simple as lunch was an event. And with Hagrid on his way, followed, presumably, by the rest of the family, it promised to be one of the liveliest meals he'd ever had. "Of course we have serious work to do," George reminded them, leaning out the 4th-floor window alongside Fred. "Mom's noticed how well we're doing. Our monthly earnings now even outpace Dad's old salary." "And don't forget," Fred added with a grin, "we've been studying up on new formulas and reading plenty of technical journals. Our grades can't be slipping." Below them, Ron stomped over to the table and chairs Percy had just set out on the lawn. "I made all those extendable ears and flares," he complained, flopping down into a chair as if it had offended him personally. "I shouldn't have rushed. That's just not fair." Harry watched quietly, feeling a twinge of guilt. He'd overheard Fred and George's progress reports earlier, how they developed new joke shop products, tested them, and sold out in no time. He'd even thought, if I'd known, I would have helped them. Neville, awkwardly shifting his weight from one foot to the other, echoed Harry's embarrassment. "Don't worry," George called down. "We're all magical now. Wand fluttering for chores is barely any work. Anyway, you lot are guests. No point in mucking in." Harry sighed. Draco pushed past him and shrugged. "You know Harry. If he could pitch in without upsetting anyone, he'd have done it already. Besides, if any of us chipped in on Weasley chores, Ron'd get a mouthful from Mum." Harry nodded helplessly, suddenly wishing he hadn't learned a silencing charm. If only he could have helped. If only he'd used his magic to lend a hand. Instead, he felt powerless to balance his desire to assist with the tangled family dynamics at play. Last summer, when he'd spent his vacation at the Burrow under the strict no-magic rules of the Ministry, he'd become something of an expert at ordinary housework. No spells allowed, just elbow grease. After all, life with the Dursleys had taught him every chore imaginable. But now, with every Weasley armed with a wand, even the toughest cleaning jobs could be handled in an instant. He really had no excuse to volunteer. Mrs. Weasley, of course, disagreed. "Honestly," she scolded, waving her hand at the guests lazily dusting shelves, "it's so simple. You're perfectly capable of doing it yourself. Why let everyone else do the work?" He smiled wryly. Even though he was officially engaged to Ginny, in Mrs. Weasley's eyes he remained a guest, and, now that he was her future son-in-law, all the more reason to fuss over. He was about to protest when the dull tension in the room shattered. The green flames in the hearth leapt higher, and a massive shape stepped through. "Hagrid!" he called, relief flooding him. The giant's beard quivered with his grin, and his little beetle-black eyes shone at the sight of Harry. A few stray embers still flickered in Hagrid's tangled hair, turning it into a blazing halo, and for a moment he looked more Weasley than any of them. "Hephaestus!" Ron called out with a laugh, and Draco straightened to salute the flickering flames atop Hagrid's head. The giant laughed, shaking his flaming locks free, and the whole room burst into life once more. "Talking flames!" Fred shouted, eyes wide. "Don't gloat," George retorted, though he couldn't hide his own excitement. "Mom, hurry, come see this! It's alive!" the twins cried in unison. Percy, standing off to the side, leaned closer, brow furrowed as he tried to deduce which charm could have animated a mere spark. Just then, plates laden with roast chicken, stuffing, and crispy potatoes floated in from the kitchen, settling neatly before Mrs. Weasley. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward, blinking at the sight of Hagrid lumbering in, a small, flickering flame perched atop his wild hair. "Rubus, you're early," she chided, half smiling. "I still have a pot of onion soup bubbling away. And is this the famous Hephaestus? I've never actually met him." Mrs. Weasley stared at the living ember balanced on Hagrid's head. For a moment, Harry was sure she'd thought Hagrid was a stray Weasley cousin. His hair looked that tidy. Hagrid beamed. "Aren't they just the cutest?" He crouched down and gently tapped the flame. "Hello, Mrs. Weasley. Long time no see, Ron, Draco, Harry, Ginny." At his greeting, the tiny flame slid off Hagrid's hair and settled on the floor, growing into a little figure no taller than a foot. Sparkling embers formed its hair, and then a high, childlike voice chirped, "Hello, everyone." Mrs. Weasley laughed delightedly and reached out to stroke the creature's ember locks. "Well, hello there, little guy. Here's a polished, idiomatic revision of your note. I've just finished catching up on the latest news, including updates from our author group. I planned to take the day off, but I couldn't resist diving back into code. Since today's a special day, there's something I'd like to share, though I'm a little nervous about stepping over any lines. Oh well. P.S. A big thank you to Yuchi Jinyin for the monthly tickets, and to everyone else who's recommended and subscribed." Chapter 76, Hagrid's Surprise. The sun beat down mercilessly, and anyone without shade clustered around an enormous bonfire Hagrid had summoned, or rather, the creature he called Hephaestus. Its flames roared hotter than a dragon's breath. Yet, by some bit of Hagrid's magic, the fire drew in all the heat around it and exhaled cool, refreshing breezes. Everyone's forehead was as dry and unblemished as polished marble, not a bead of sweat in sight. Harry and the others were used to Hagrid's extravagant tricks by now, but Percy, and especially Fred and George, who had spent most of the last term up at the Ministry, were wide-eyed with wonder. They crowded closer, as if they'd never seen anything so splendid. Mrs. Weasley, sitting beside Hagrid, giggled like a schoolgirl. Every so often she'd toss a scrap of food into the flames, what she called feeding Hephaestus's belly. Hagrid, puffing on his meerschaum pipe, offered running commentary. "Better use chicken bones than flesh. He gets through the good bits too quick. And bread, dear, bread roasts nicer than vegetables." Soon the group was happily drinking, roasting bits of meat and loaf right in the enchanted fire, and enjoying the cool breeze it created. By the time the sun began its descent past high noon, staining the sky a deeper gold, they'd emptied more than one flagon of wine and filled their bellies thoroughly. Harry wiped his mouth, glanced at Hagrid, and said, "So, Hagrid, what did you want to show us today?" Hagrid's eyes twinkled. "Two things," he replied, gearing up for the surprise he'd promised. And at that, everyone leaned in, eager to see what wonders the gentle giant had in store. Chapter 10. The long tables of the Great Hall buzzed with chatter as dinner was served, but a sudden hush fell the moment Hagrid cleared his throat. He tapped the mahogany surface with a massive knuckle, drawing every eye to him. "Dumbledore and I both agreed to keep this a surprise," Hagrid announced, blinking solemnly. Ron froze mid-mash of potatoes, pumpkin juice halfway to his lips. "A surprise?" he echoed. "One of you two?" Hagrid's grin widened. He rapped the table again for emphasis. I am, officially, the new professor of magical biology at Hogwarts. A ripple of astonished whispers swelled down the table. Neville Longbottom sat bolt upright, nearly toppling his goblet. I knew it, he exclaimed. But Dumbledore and everyone else still didn't believe me? I thought... Does this have anything to do with you, Neville? Harry asked gently, glancing at Ron for support. Fred and George Weasley exchanged incredulous looks. In their eyes, Neville had always been the shy, chubby boy, the last person they'd imagine orchestrating anything so grand that it convinced a professor to, well, step aside from class. Yet here he was, beaming with pride. Hagrid waved a huge hand. Now, this isn't about Neville's billywig experiments, though those little bugs nearly drove Professor Sprout dotty last week. No, the real reason is that Professor Binns's lectures were getting, shall we say, thoroughly snooze-inducing. The board thought magical biology could bring some fresh excitement, so who better to teach it than me? Neville exhaled a happy "oh" and sank back onto the bench, chest puffed in triumph. So it really is true. Hagrid's grin softened. I thought you lot might have guessed, he said, sounding just a touch disappointed that Harry hadn't called it first. Of course, Harry insisted, though his tone wavered. He shot Ron a look, clearly unsure how to follow up. Ron shrugged with an easy smile. Well, brilliant, Hagrid. Congratulations, Professor Magical Biology. A round of applause echoed through the hall. The students returned to their feasts, laughter and good humor filling the air as everyone came to terms with the exciting news. Hogwarts' newest professor would be their beloved gamekeeper, Hagrid, leading them into the wild world of magical biology. Ron's face lit up as though he'd suddenly seen daylight. He slapped his hands together with theatrical flair. Why didn't he think of this before? Who else but Hagrid would send us after a book that actually bites? Ginny shot Ron an exasperated look, then softened her tone into something so sweet it practically dripped. Honestly, it's a fantastic book. Hagrid's own recommendation. We just assumed that Professor Kelburn, after last term's mishaps, would pick something more conventional for his teaching materials. Hagrid gave a lopsided grin, his bushy eyebrows lifting in delight. Well, I'm hardly as professional as Professor Kelburn, he admitted, his cheeks coloring as he shot them an eager glance. So, have you two read the whole thing? Of course. Ron was quick to volunteer, rising to his feet with a proud grin. He rapped the table for emphasis. I remember everything. The proud hippogriff, the scheming house elf, even that rare, hidden monster. At that, Hagrid let out a great, relieved sigh. His shoulders relaxed, and a small, hopeful smile spread across his face. It seems Ginny wasn't just flattering me, Hagrid muttered to himself, noticing the shift in Ron's expression at the far end of the dining table. Ron beamed with confidence and tossed back a grin. The only drawback is that your book, Hagrid, is so feisty it nearly nipped my toes off. I've got to wrestle with it every time I open it. Harry and the others laughed and nodded. But as their amusement faded into awkward silence, Hagrid's grin slipped away. Unbothered, Ron shrugged. Come on, you think I'd know so much about these magical creatures without cracking it open? Harry subdued those little monsters in one go, and we got the full scoop ourselves. Hagrid blinked, bewildered. But you didn't just casually glance through it, did you? He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a well-worn green book, its covers and margins scrawled with his own notes. See here. As soon as Hagrid drew the emerald-bound book from his pack, it snapped at him like a snarling creature. Undeterred, he simply ran his finger down its spine. The book shivered, then fell open and lay quietly in his broad hands. When everyone saw the pages, crowded with neat twisting notes, their anxious expressions softened. Ginny hesitated a moment, then spoke. Maybe Harry's just too good. You've all seen how he handles a broomstick. Nothing phases him. A book like this could leave the rest of us baffled, but to Harry, it's as simple as plucking an apple from a tree. The answer practically jumps right out, so you don't have to dream up anything fancy. Hagrid let out a relieved chuckle. Well, I'll be. These books can be outrageously temperamental. Shame, though, you'd have missed the chance to learn how to calm it yourself. Ron opened his mouth to argue, but Harry jabbed him in the ribs. Hagrid, what's the second task? Harry asked, a note of urgency in his voice. Better to steer Ron away from more unhelpful remarks. After everything Hagrid had been through last semester, he might have grown even stronger, but his big heart was still exactly the same. Harry felt confident in his growing strength, but he couldn't deny that on paper he was lagging behind. Ever since dropping most of his classes, he'd hardly set foot in the library, and Dumbledore's occasional private lessons had done little to fill the gap. Just then, Hagrid reached into his enormous coat pocket and produced 5 smooth, pebble-like objects, which he dropped into his waiting hand with a soft clink. "These," he announced, eyes bright, "are special magic seeds I brought back from a professor over in Castrumbush." Harry counted them, 5 in total. So Fred, George, and Percy would be left out. "What exactly are they?" "Magic seeds," Hagrid explained, stroking his shaggy beard. "But only wizards under 14 can activate them." "How do you use them? Do you eat them?" Ron asked, licking a smear of pumpkin juice from his lip. Hagrid chuckled and gave Ron's mug a gentle nudge. "They're not for eating, Ron." Draco Malfoy, perched on the next bench, eyed the seeds with thinly veiled curiosity. "So they're a Castrumbush alternative to wands?" "Almost," Hagrid replied. "They're neither wands nor snacks, but each one holds a unique magical effect. You'll see soon enough." Chapter 77. The Mysterious Tree Shepherd. Harry held the crimson seed between his fingers, staring at it in wonder. "Seeds," he murmured. "Do they have to be planted in soil?" The little pod pulsed in his palm, its red surface almost as if it throbbed with a heartbeat of its own. Hagrid gave a slow, secretive smile. "Have any of you ever come across the term tree shepherd?" Neville shook his head. "I've heard rumors, a lost school of magic, something like that, but I don't know the details." He glanced at the seed in Hagrid's hand. Could this enchanted kernel be tied to those old legends? Tree shepherds are actually an offshoot of an ancient wizarding pursuit, longevity, Hagrid explained, his voice hushed. You see, a wizard's natural lifespan rarely stretches beyond 200 years. Trees, on the other hand, well, take the Patriarca Floresta in Brazil. That one's over 3,000 years old and protected by both magical and muggle law. The tree shepherd's craft is to bind one's life force to a tree's. In doing so, the wizard draws upon the tree's vitality, extending his own lifespan far beyond normal limits. Ron stared at the seed, eyes wide. You mean you're offering these to us? So we can actually become tree shepherds? Hagrid studied Ron with a twinkle in his eye. That's exactly what these are for. But it's no simple trick, and there are risks. Roots that run deep can sometimes wound deeper still. Harry tucked the glowing seed into his pocket. A thrill of excitement and a flicker of dread ran down his spine. In that moment, he understood. Their lives were about to change forever. Isn't this more valuable than the Philosopher's Stone? Ron gushed, eyes gleaming. After all, Nicholas Flamel has lived for over 600 years. Now hang on, Harry said, holding up a hand. He glanced at Ron, then studied the little red seeds cradled in his palm. Hagrid hasn't finished explaining. These are holly berries from a holly tree. Under normal conditions, a holly lives only 3 to 5 years. Ron, if you really think planting one of these would extend your life, wouldn't it actually shorten it? Draco Malfoy, lounging by the fence, smirked. Let me guess, Hagrid gathered holly, cherry, willow, yew, and hawthorn seeds, right? Ron's face lit up as realization dawned. You're onto something. Our wand woods. That means my willow seeds have the shortest lifespan of the lot. Harry shook his head, amused. Exactly. I've studied wand lore. Wand trees are magical, yes, but they age just like any other tree. Willow usually lives 20 to 30 years. A few rare specimens might reach 100, but that's it. No secret to eternal life hidden in willow branches. Hagrid chuckled, shaking his massive head. See? None of you're getting younger by planting these seeds, though they'll make fine additions to the school grounds once they sprout. Neville's wand was carved from cherry wood, a species whose natural lifespan stretches 50 to 70 years, though, with meticulous care, some wands manage to endure for a century. Draco's wand, made of hawthorn, fared even better. Hawthorn trees typically remain vigorous for 60 to 70 years without showing a hint of age, and on rare occasions can live well beyond a century and a half. But Ginny's wand was the most remarkable of the three. Fashioned from yew wood, it boasted a lineage of longevity that bordered on the legendary. In fact, the oldest known yew stands in the churchyard of St. Snoggs in Wales, a living relic estimated to be 5,000 years old. And that ancient timber, some whispered, once belonged to a wand very like her brother's. Hagrid leaned over the display, his eyes glinting with the wonder he so often carried into the forbidden forest. The old tree shepherding school, he said, was a glorious muddle, sort of like what the Dumbledore clan tried with the Phoenix, an attempt at outright immortality. They didn't succeed, of course, but they discovered something fascinating along the way. When a wizard bound their life force to a young sapling, the tree would grow, and then at the height of its maturity, it would just keel over and die. And at the same time, the wizard's magic underwent a parallel transformation. He tapped the cherry wand gently. Trouble is, that trick only works on young witches and wizards, those whose magic still crackles with the pure, unfiltered vitality they were born with. Professor Castrubsha says you need that original spark, or else your magic can't shape itself around the growth and eventual decay of its bonded tree. I frowned, uneasy at the thought. So you die with your wand? Hagrid shrugged, his shoulders rumbling beneath his coat. Death, yeah. Makes you wonder if the shortest-lived wood might actually be the safest choice, if all you care about is avoiding that kind of transformation. What about Ginny? Ron blurted, his voice tight with fear. She's almost certainly dead, but her tree, it's still alive, isn't it? Harry exchanged a glance with Ron. He knew that Ginny's wand, like Voldemort's, was made of yew, and yew trees could live for centuries. Hagrid, meanwhile, fished a battered notebook from his coat pocket and flipped it open. Not quite so simple, Ron, Hagrid said, tapping the page with a stubby finger. Let me explain how a contract tree works. The others gathered round as Hagrid cleared his throat. A contract tree is the living source a wizard bonds with when they make their wand. But only certain trees, wandwood trees, will ever serve as contract trees. And it's not just about age. A fully mature tree, even if it's the right species, often rejects a wizard's magic outright. Only those trees whose very nature aligns with a witch or wizard will willingly accept and grow in harmony with their magic. He jotted down a rough sketch of a tree ring pattern. So a tree shepherd, that's what we call someone who raises potential wandwoods, faces two huge challenges. First, from the tens of millions of tree species in the world, they must single out those that can actually become wandwood. Second, each chosen species must be magically compatible with its future master. Those twin requirements have long been a natural barrier, stalling the development of wand-quality trees. Harry nodded, recalling the centuries-old methods of wand makers. Trial and error, chopping and testing, every tree a gamble. But over the years, Hagrid continued with a grin, tree shepherds got a bit of inspiration from wand makers. They noticed that those little bowtruckles, those tree guardians of the wandwoods, can sniff out wand-quality trees in no time. It turns out, bowtruckles don't just guard the wood, they recognize it too. He closed his notebook. So if Ginny's tree is still standing, and a bowtruckle's settled there, we have hope. The tree may well be biding its time, waiting for someone to come along whose magic it can bond with next. Ron let out a shaky breath. So, there's still a chance? A chance, Hagrid confirmed, that her tree will one day find a new master, or, if the dark has not utterly tainted it, maybe even bind once more to the wizard it started with. Hagrid flipped through the notebook, his finger tracing each line as he read aloud. It says here that wizards' contract trees, the very species whose wood is prized for wands, are the key to the tree shepherd tradition. Those two breakthroughs let the shepherding system survive, and in Castrubsha it's been refined over the last few centuries. Practically speaking, a wizard's power usually awakens when their bonded tree dies naturally. But that's not set in stone. If a contract tree lives a long life, its shepherd can still trigger a magical transformation early by guiding the tree through its seasonal cycle: spring sprout, summer growth, autumn ripening, winter rest. Whether that succeeds depends entirely on the shepherd's own talent. In fact, over the past 100 years, the most gifted have even transformed the moment their trees first broke ground. On the other hand, some never manage it. Their trees flourish for decades and then perish without ever rousing the shepherd's magic. Draco leaned forward, eyes narrowing. So once these trees are planted, they stay linked to us? He tapped the page. What if someone destroys them? Would that cut us off or worse? He looked to Hagrid, waiting for an answer. No sooner had Hagrid finished his explanation than Draco's imagination ran wild. He pictured a tree shepherd, enemy whose power sprang from a contract tree, and realized that destroying that tree might be the only way to stop it from growing. Breaking the contract tree does hurt the wizard, Hagrid confirmed. One poor fellow, who insists on remaining anonymous, said it felt like taking a solid blow to the head. But aside from that, there's no lasting damage. Their other magic still works, and they can continue learning new spells. So no, it won't block their future transformations. Fred raised his hand next, curiosity in his eyes. What about curses? Could someone curse you through the bond between wizard and tree? Hagrid shot the twins an irritated look. No, that connection can be severed unilaterally by the wizard, curses included. A few students exchanged confused glances, prompting Hagrid to ask, "All right, what do you think I mean by transformation, then?" Harry and Neville spoke up together. "Is it an enhancement of magical power?" "Exactly," Hagrid said, brightening. "Every witch and wizard has a unique area of expertise. When magic transforms, it evolves in harmony with your innate talents, spawning brand new abilities. Think of a metamorphmagus. No wand needed, no lesson required. It's an instinctive gift, just like breathing." "I asked Professor Castrubsha about them," Hagrid went on, "but he said these abilities are as closely guarded as a tree shepherd's underwear color. Only a handful ever admit to having one. They aren't considered special, really. Most witches and wizards who have them find them so ordinary that you'd hardly notice." "Ordinary?" Harry frowned. Hagrid nodded, tapping his finger against his chin. "Exactly. Let me give you an example. There's a wizard who's exceptionally good at fire spells. He's nicknamed Flame. His unique gift, or transfigured ability as they call it, lets him conjure pure fire with nothing but his will. No wand, no incantation. He just thinks it, and there it is." Chapter 78, Ceremony Under the Banyan Tree. Moonlight was faint tonight, half hidden by drifting clouds so that only a soft sliver of silver light filtered through. Beneath the gnarled branches of the ancient banyan, mottled shadows danced across the forest floor. A tall figure lurked in that gloom, chuckling softly. When a beam of moonlight slipped between the leaves, it illuminated a kind, bearded face, Rubus Hagrid's. He stood proud and hopeful before 5 terracotta pots brimming with dark, rich soil, a single vial of glowing green liquid, and 5 eager students. "You'll all be fine," Hagrid said, brushing a lock of hair out of his eyes. His voice wavered with a hint of guilt and nerves. This was his first time leading the banyan tree ritual as a teacher. Though he'd shepherded the ceremony countless times back at Castrupsha, doing so for Hogwarts pupils felt entirely different. "Not a problem," Ron Weasley said, stepping forward. "We've chanted the incantations to our seeds hundreds of times, and we've followed every pronunciation exactly as it appears in the magical syllabary," Neville Longbottom added, confidence bright in his eyes. "Harry's double-checked all our work. There's absolutely no mistake," Ginny Weasley and Draco Malfoy declared in perfect unison. Harry Potter gave a reassuring nod from the edge of the circle. With that, Hagrid straightened his shoulders, lifted his wand, and signaled them to begin the ritual under the gentle glow of the banyan's starlit canopy. They all sensed it at once. The bond with the seeds had taken hold. Though the magical thread wavering between them and the plants flickered as if on the verge of snapping, it grew steadily stronger and more distinct. "All right," Hagrid said, rubbing his massive hands together and drawing a deep breath. "The only thing left is the potion." He lifted the slender glass vial high above his head, his free hand weaving through the air in deliberate patterns. At that moment, the clouds obscuring the moon drifted apart as if pushed by an unseen giant's fingers. Moonlight spilled down through the branches, illuminating the pale green liquid inside the vial. Slowly, the solution began to churn and bubble, as though stirred by an invisible fire. Behind Hagrid, the surrounding trees shivered, their leaves quivering in response to the silent magic uniting moonlight, forest, and potion under his command. Tiny flecks of gold appeared on the liquid's surface, as if someone had sprinkled in grains of stardust. "Now!" Harry called, heart pounding. In unison, the 5 of them each plucked a strand of hair, root and all, from their heads and pressed it into the pot, the follicles sinking into the soil. The moment the hair touched the earth, the pot jolted violently. In Hagrid's hand, The potion erupted into a roar of bubbles, more intense and fervent than before. The ritual was underway, and nothing would ever be the same. Hagrid flicked the stopper free, and a shimmering green liquid laced with golden sparks poured from the vial. The fine, almost invisible hairs sprouting from each of the 5 flower pots acted like tiny straws, drawing the potion in. The pots trembled as the elixir seeped into the soil, then fell perfectly still the moment the last drop vanished. "There we go," Hagrid announced, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. Ron let out a long sigh of relief. "Phew, although honestly, I could have done without adding our own blood to the mix. Dad's hairline's already disappearing fast. I'm not sure this helped." He gave Draco a sideways look. Draco brushed his hand through his thick dark hair. "Spare me, Weasley. Some of us start with more follicles to begin with." Ginny rolled her eyes. "Could you two quit bickering about hair? There are more important things at stake." Hagrid slipped the empty vial into his coat and stepped back from the pots. He clasped his huge hands together, muttering an incantation under his breath. Instantly, a ring of golden runes appeared around the ancient banyan tree, crackling with sparks. "That should do it," he said with a satisfied nod. "A perfect deterrent for goblins and any other curiosity seekers while we're gone. Unless I've forgotten something." "It should be fine," Hagrid said with a broad grin. "You'll see the saplings sprout by tomorrow morning." Ron frowned, glancing at the row of clay pots nestled around the banyan tree's roots. "Hagrid, you're starting to sound like some kind of jungle wizard, casting every spell with a mud-covered wand. But what if it rains tonight? I know these pots have to stay in contact with the tree's medium until the seeds germinate. Shouldn't we build a canopy? I mean, I finally donated my precious hair for this project. I'm not about to have it go to waste." Draco rolled his eyes. "Honestly, whether it's Ron's hair or these contract tree seeds, the specimens are priceless. I'm only pointing out what's at stake." Draco, Hagrid said, chuckling as he shook his head. "Brazil's rainforests see far more precipitation than a bit of British drizzle. I did my homework. Unless someone topples the pots, eats the seeds," he shot Ron a warning look, "or sets them ablaze, a little water won't stop these trees from growing." Ginny, still stroking the rim of her own pot, looked up eagerly. "Okay, but once they sprout, what do we do next? Do we need to cast another spell to awaken their special abilities?" Harry stared dubiously at the row of tiny yew saplings, each nestled in its own clay pot. "Do you really think these long-lived trees can stay in pots forever without getting stunted?" Hagrid's eyes went wide. He fumbled in his coat pocket, then triumphantly produced a battered notebook. "Didn't I tell you? Look here." He flipped it open to a dog-eared page. "According to this, once the seedlings have germinated for a month, they're ready for permanent soil. I've already arranged a spot for 'em in the Forbidden Forest." Harry wiped sweat from his brow. "The Forbidden Forest, you say? Perfect. Nothing that happens in there escapes your notice, Hagrid." Hagrid beamed and brushed his hand across his forehead. Harry couldn't help but recall their last trip to the forest. Hagrid had somehow spotted Lupin inside that little hut and even managed to converse with him without saying a word aloud. If anyone could keep a handful of saplings safe, it was Hagrid. Nearby, Neville Longbottom frowned in genuine curiosity. "Are you serious? Nothing in the Forbidden Forest escapes Hagrid's eyes. Literally?" Harry glanced at Neville, remembering the strange vision of a curved sword that had come to him not long ago. Since then, Neville had seemed to carry a new sort of perception, as if he could peer into people's hearts. Now his question held a mixture of awe and a touch of reverence. Hagrid gave a confident nod. "Honestly, Nev, I'll keep an eye on those trees like I do on everything else in that wood. They'll be safe as can be." Based on what Ryan told us, this stage is known as Sword Heart Clarity, a realm you enter once you've fully mastered your blade. Only now did he finally understand what Harry had been getting at. "It's true," Ron announced, brimming with pride. "Hagrid must have undergone his own magical transformation. He didn't rely on those enchanted trees at all. He's awakened several abilities. An extraordinary perception, though it seems limited to the Forbidden Forest and weakens dramatically beyond its borders. The power to give life to inanimate or dead things. That's how Hephaestus got his gift, but Dumbledore warned you can't use it too often." Permanently animating objects draws directly from your own magical reserves, and the ability to command magical creatures. Ever since Hagrid's change, that giant eight-eyed spider he raises has become far more obedient. Ron's grin grew wider, as if he were the one who'd unlocked these powers instead of Hagrid. "Is that transformation really that powerful?" Neville asked, eyes wide. "I wonder what ability I'll awaken. It'd be fantastic if I could fly." Neville believed him without question, not realizing that Ron's offhand guess about Hagrid's powers was surprisingly spot on. Hagrid's change wasn't any ordinary magical transformation. It felt more like a bloodline awakening. Draco stifled a yawn and rubbed at his temples. "It's getting late. I need my sleep if I'm going to keep my scalp healthy." He paused, glancing down at his hand before brushing his hair aside. "And Holly, Harry's wand wood, has the shortest lifespan of them all, right? Give it 2 or 3 years, and we'll see exactly what talent he's awakened." With that, he ran a hand through his silky hair once more, then turned toward the dormitory stairs. "Come on, let's get some rest." Chapter 79, Parallel Immortals. The story rewinds to the days before Hagrid unveiled the Tree Shepherd system. At Smith Castle, thousands of miles away, 3 figures were sprawled across a cold, supple sofa in its grand study. They weren't napping, quite the opposite. Their eyes sparkled with excitement as they watched the ever-shifting images projected on cloud-like screens hovering in the air. Pure white cloud beds drifted lazily beneath the high ceiling, each one displaying a different scene. On the central screen, a spry old man with snow-white hair was deep in conversation with Hagrid inside his wooden cabin. 5 plump, polished pebbles lay in a neat row on the table before them. "By Merlin's beard, you've got to be joking, kid. This fellow is nearly 300 years old?" Kate blurted, her voice trembling with amazement. Yet despite her excitement, her body felt numb, as though her bones had forgotten how to move. It wasn't fatigue, far from it. The sofa was to blame. Its interior seemed filled with chilled water, yet it didn't wobble like a waterbed. Every so often, the couch emitted a gentle electric pulse that teased away any trace of soreness, leaving her in a state of blissful immobility. Beside her, the other 2 watchers sat equally enthralled, each unable to tear their eyes from the unfolding spectacle. Across the miles, in Hagrid's cozy cabin, secrets were about to surface. Secrets that would ripple through time and change everything they knew about immortality. It felt as if a team of master masseurs, each with decades of experience, were giving them a full-body spa. Even Jerry, the portly cat, and Nagini, the sleek snake, found themselves shrinking to the perfect size and nesting contentedly beside Penelope and Ryan. Dr. Flywheel, the hyperactive hamster, lived up to his name, scurrying round and round on his tiny wheel to burn off the excess magical energy coursing through him. "It's a pity Fleur's gone back to France," Penelope sighed, her eyelids drooping with bliss. "She's really missing out on this sofa." She let out a soft moan of relief and reached over to nudge Jerry's plush belly. Though Penelope's gaze flickered to the framed painting on the wall, she didn't have a chance to comment. Kate had already asked every question Penelope had in mind. Instead, she sank deeper into the cushions, utterly relaxed. Ryan rested his head on Nagini's cool coils and gave Penelope a lazy grin. "You know it's all Gabrielle's fault," he said. "She can't bear being away from her sister. Fleur's basically her bonded sister-slave. If Gabrielle wanted her to pluck stars from the sky, she'd do it." He looked over at Kate, almost swallowed by the sofa's embrace, and added, "By the way, he's the only successful tree herder I've ever heard of. He used a remarkably simple trick to secure immortality." Kate tipped her head, considering. "Then his contract tree must be a long-lived species, something like a fir, perhaps?" They all sank further into the sofa's soothing depths, the conversation drifting into speculations about ancient magic, long-lived forests, and the curious ways power finds its roots. "Wait, did he just say the Patriarcha Floresta tree?" Kate bounced on the sofa, eyes wide with excitement. "Not possible, Kate," Penelope replied, folding her arms. "A contract tree only grows from specially selected species. If it really were a Patriarcha Floresta, it would have to be about 3,000 years old." Her voice carried across the room so sharply that Jerry, curled up and half asleep, flicked his black tail in annoyance. Kate turned to Ryan. "Well, what do you think?" Ryan sighed and rolled his eyes. Either the master misspoke or the book has it wrong. The 3-year lifespan of Hollywood doesn't refer to the tree itself, but to its seeds, how long they remain viable if stored correctly. And when the book calls Haloxylon amodendron the shortest-lived tree, it's talking about its seeds, which can last only a few hours. The tree itself can easily live a century or more. He tapped the open page. Most arboreal guides only describe what a tree looks like and how to cultivate it. They lump anything around 100 years under short-lived and anything in the thousands under long-lived, but everything in between is annoyingly vague. Many people even mistake a holly's dormancy period, how long its seeds must rest before they can germinate, for the tree's actual lifespan, and this error has gone largely uncorrected. Only wand makers who've handled Hollywood firsthand, or muggle botanists with a keen interest in the plant, are aware of the distinction. Everyone else, seeking answers online or through hearsay, ends up baffled by incomplete or inaccurate information. Surprisingly, even the immortal known as the tree shepherd fell into this trap. After all, although holly is a hardy perennial that can live for centuries in the wild, it often withers away after just 2 or 3 years when potted indoors. Few caretakers understand the subtle conditions holly trees need: proper light, drainage, soil composition, and the right dormancy cycle. So if you really master those details, you can keep a holly alive for a decade or more. Because his contract tree is also a houseplant, the tree shepherd assumed it would follow the same short-lived pattern he'd seen so often. Confident in his own expertise, he dismissed every report of indoor hollies surviving for decades. More than that, the bond he'd formed with his contract tree tied him to his home. Unlike most wizards who roamed the world after graduation, he rarely ventured beyond his front door. In every sense, he had become a true Wizarding World recluse, an otaku whose life revolved entirely around his beloved trees. In the days before the internet, narrow-mindedness was commonplace, and this so-called immortal was no exception. "There's no way his contract tree is holly," Kate said, curling her lip in disdain. "It's pine. And here's a bit of wand lore. Pine wands tend to bond with masters fated for long lives. I've never heard of a pine wand owner dying young. Intriguing, isn't it?" Ryan smiled, his gaze locked on the white-bearded elder flickering on the screen, as if he could burn him to ashes with a look. "That's interesting, but the real twist is this. Both the tree shepherd school and the pineapple tree trace their origins to Brazil. As luck would have it, he's Brazilian, and so is his contract tree. Do you suppose his pineapples taste any sweeter because of it?" Kate's eyes gleamed. So that's how he ties everything together, creatively reconnecting the school to its roots and to immortality. Penelope sighed softly. And that's just the beginning. Click through to the next page for more thrilling revelations. She knew that pine wands with straight grains always chose free-spirited, fiercely independent owners, people who might seem aloof, enigmatic, or simply uninterested in small talk. Pinewood craves creativity. It welcomes new spells and experimental charms more readily than any other wand would. It's also unusually sensitive to silent magic, picking up the slightest intention. "Kate," Ryan sighed, shaking his head. "This isn't about destiny or fate. He just awakened a remarkable ability. And before you ask, yes, I'm talking about pine trees, not pineapples. Pineapples aren't trees at all, by Muggle standards." Kate rolled her eyes. "I was really hoping for fresh pineapple, but I get it. Pine trees. So his magic must be connected to that old tree shepherd legend, where the wizard shares in the tree's longevity." "Bingo," Ryan said, smiling. "His gift is precisely that. He's become what scholars call a castor pollock, essentially immortal through his bond with a living pine. His grandson, Libasi Pollock, went on to become a famous apothecary, but not because of potions. The Pollocks excel in another kind of magic, the illusory contract, or the power of the agreement itself. They craft bindings so convincing that reality bends to their will." Kate frowned, absorbing the weight of his words. "So every time someone breaks one of their contracts, the consequences can be devastating," Ryan finished. He turned toward the window, where the moonlight filtered through needles of a towering pine outside. "That's why we need to understand his power before someone else does, and before it's too late." Ryan exhaled softly. The power he had unlocked was, at its core, a living contract. a bond born from his ambition to reach the ultimate heights of the tree shepherd's school. By sealing himself to the contract tree, he could share in its extraordinary life force. After all, pine trees are renowned for their longevity. Most live well beyond 1,200 years, and with careful cultivation, they can endure far longer. The oldest known pine has stood for 5,000 years. Through this sacred covenant, he too transcended the mortal coil and stepped into the immortal realm. Chapter 523. Extending life is surprisingly simple. In the magical world, prolonging one's lifespan isn't nearly as complicated as most wizards imagine. Once a practitioner reaches the minimum proficiency of a Hogwarts professor, level 4, in any given discipline, and provided there exists a longevity method tied to that discipline, achieving immortality becomes almost routine. Every field, potions, transfiguration, charms, alchemy, and even more obscure branches, hides its own secret to life extension. Take potions, for example. A wizard who masters potions to level 4 and uncovers a recipe for longevity can brew an immortality draught just as easily as they'd mix a healing potion. The only requirements are the correct formula and the necessary ingredients. With those in hand, replicating the work of an earlier master guarantees extended life. This is precisely what Professor Snape meant in his first-year lecture when he so pointedly spoke of stopping death. He wasn't referring merely to cures for intractable illnesses. He was talking about arresting the aging process altogether. A potions expert who deciphers such a formula can literally halt their own mortality. And it isn't limited to potions. Imagine if Hogwarts offered a dedicated course in dark magic. A wizard who reached level 3 in that perilous art could likewise unlock the secret of agelessness. It's an apt illustration of the magical world's darker undercurrents, how the path to immortality often lies in the very depths of arcane power. In magic, as in life, it can be far easier to master the forbidden than to perfect the virtuous. Chapter 7. A Grim Shortcut. Compared to white and conventional magic, black magic is astonishingly easy to learn and brutally unforgiving to both its user and its victims. The Secrets of Advanced Black Magic lays this bare, devoting an entire section to the simplest path to eternal life, the Horcrux. According to the text, all you need is to take a person's life, muggle or wizard, and bind a fragment of your soul to an object. In the enchantment's eyes, there's no difference between a muggle and a witch or wizard. This detail alone tells you something crucial about Lord Voldemort. He couldn't have been a true pureblood. If he were, he would have used the life of a wizard for his Horcrux, not that of some random muggle. Indeed, in the original timeline, Voldemort spared the unfortunate Bertha Jorkins and instead sacrificed an elderly muggle named Frank to empower Nagini. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The real lesson here is that longevity in magic isn't about raw power, it's about creativity. No matter how advanced your spell work, it gains nothing without a fresh concept to drive it. That's why many of the so-called cutting-edge Slytherin spells collapse under scrutiny. They're flashy tricks, not grounded innovations. And if you were foolish enough to follow the Horcrux ritual verbatim, you'd discover that the required incantations and soul-binding rituals demand dark magic on the level of a 6th-tier demigod. In the end, it's not the magnitude of your magic that defines you, it's your willingness to think the unthinkable, and the courage or cruelty to see it through. Ravenclaw's famed ghostification enchantment, said to preserve a witch or wizard's consciousness after death, remains one of the most talked-about spells in the magical world. Yet its complexity is staggering. Only those with near-demigod talent can hope to master it. Then there's the alchemist's ultimate prize, the Philosopher's Stone, which miraculously produced the elixir of life. Discovered by pure accident, it granted its creator Nicholas Flamel centuries of longevity that no one else has ever been able to replicate. And yet, despite such marvels, few wizards truly crave eternal life. Most of the older generation regard death not as a tragedy, but as the greatest adventure of all, an opportunity to reunite with friends and family who passed on long ago. Why linger through endless decades when, sooner or later, your own descendants will follow the same path? High-level witches and wizards aren't ignorant of what awaits beyond the veil. They understand the afterlife's egalitarian calm and almost heavenly serenity. To study it firsthand, the British Ministry of Magic even maintains a Hall of Death, a chamber whose curtain conceals the one-way road to eternity. At the heart of all these mysteries stands Ignotus Peverell, the so-called God of Death, whom Ryan has marked as his greatest rival. Under Ryan's leadership, the afterlife blossomed into an egalitarian refuge, free of oppression and suffused with the serenity of heaven. It was this transformation that earned him the title of the greatest god-wizard of all time. One after another, immortals, weary of loneliness and despair, chose a gentle passing under his compassionate guidance. None of his daring confrontation with the God of Death would have been possible without his other identity, direct descendant of Antioch Peverell. Imagine the office of the God of Death as a royal throne. Many claimants, Potter, Longbottom, Smith, Gaunt, are nobles without succession rights. Only Ryan and Neville carry a legitimate blood claim. Harry Potter himself stands as the undisputed heir. Voldemort, though born within that lineage, became a traitor when he murdered his kinsman James Potter. In doing so, he forfeited his birthright, even as his royal blood remained. Identifying the true heir to the God of Death is surprisingly simple. It reveals itself when their parents teeter on the brink of mortality. The previous heir, Tom Riddle, renounced his claim at birth. His mother, desolate and exhausted, died in childbirth and left him at an orphanage. In her final act, she wove her remaining magic into a death curse that claimed her own life. In that split second, Tom himself became the very crisis of death for his father, and thus lost his right to the throne. Neville was the luckiest of the three, perhaps simply because his birthday fell on July 30th instead of the 31st, like Harry's and Ryan's. That single day spared him the worst of the prophecy's reach. Yet his parents still snapped under the strain, unlike Harry's and Ryan's, who died outright. All of it began when the current death god looked again for a true heir. The Chosen One prophecy wasn't solely about saving the world. It was a decree to anoint a new sovereign of death. Neville and Ryan placed a close second, but their parents paid dearly. Harry alone was designated the orthodox heir from the start. In the original timeline, Harry would claim the Deathly Hallows, confront Voldemort in a final sacrifice, and, after dying bravely, ascend as the next death itself. But Ryan refused to let that happen. His own life had been shattered by Death's whims during a trivial skirmish, and he wasn't about to watch Harry repeat the same fate. Under Ryan's bitter influence, Harry Potter became something else entirely, a living Horcrux, bound to share eternal life with Tom Riddle's diary. His only genuine hope of dying, and of ever reuniting with the mother he barely remembers, was snatched away, to be lost in the 3 school years yet to come. Lily Evans would soon return from the dead, her spirit revived by the power of the death god held within Cadmus Peverell's resurrection stone. In legend, Cadmus was the second of the 3 Peverell brothers, progenitor of the Gaunt line and the last true heir to that divine power. Unlike Ryan and his descendants, Cadmus had inherited it directly from his godlike parent. Heh. Hey, you little brat, what's so funny? Ryan snapped, blinking back to reality as Kate stood before him, arms on her hips, an inquisitive frown creasing her brow. He straightened, a half-smile playing on his lips. I was just thinking how absurd Castor Pollock's scheme is, relying on the simplest tree shepherd transfiguration to buy himself immortality. Kate's cheeks flushed. She glanced at Penelope, then met Ryan's gaze with a hopeful expression. Actually, that's what I wanted to ask. Penelope and we'd love to become tree shepherds too. Imagine unlocking some incredible new power. Both girls were already 17, well beyond the under 14 age Pollock had claimed was required to bind such a contract. Ryan shook his head, gently resting a hand on Kate's shoulder. Are you not curious how long his contract will actually last? And besides, your magic has already evolved far past that. Kate, you can step through shadows at will. Penelope, your memory works like a perfect photograph. You don't need a tree to shepherd your gifts. The tree shepherd class isn't all that useful for you right now, the system announced. If you'd like, I can spend a few seconds perfecting it. Ryan tapped his chin thoughtfully. Upgrading to a perfected tree shepherd would let him channel magic twice in succession, and even bolster Penelope's sadly underperforming photographic memory. Still, he wasn't convinced it was worth the effort. A few extra swigs of his magic elixir would deliver the same boost, and he only needed to look at Fleur to see it worked. She's been relying on her daily potion ever since. Chapter 81, Introduction to Phoenix Incarnation. Plus Ryan stood before Penelope and Kate in the dimly lit training hall, arms folded. "All right," he began. "Let's talk about why the Tree Shepherd system isn't your best path, and why you should be aiming for Phoenix Incarnation Plus instead." Penelope frowned. "But we've already invested so much time in Tree Shepherd lore. Isn't it valuable?" "Not really," Ryan said. He walked to a chalkboard and sketched 3 overlapping circles. Tree Shepherd is an archaic branch of the incarnation systems. Functional, yes, but its transformative power tops out quickly. Let me break it down. 1. Metamorph Magus ability, born with pure morphic potential. Tonks, for example, has this innate gift. Her transformations are seamless, but only half as efficient as a Tree Shepherd's at full strength. If a Tree Shepherd's transmutation coefficient is 1.0, hers is 0.5. 2. Wandless magic, essentially a diluted learned form of metamorphosis. Any modern wizard can achieve rudimentary shape-shifting through relentless study, but it never matches true atavistic magic. 3. Demigod wizards, 3-level atavism. They combine shape-shifting, essence alteration, and reality weaving. 3 distinct transformations. Take Grindelwald. He's mediocre at textbook transfiguration, yet he can mimic metamorph magus rank shifts whenever he wants. That's pure atavistic evolution, not a learned trick. Kate tapped her chin. So Tree Shepherd only shines in theory. In practice, it's cumbersome and yields diminishing returns. Exactly. Ryan erased the board. Now, compare that to Phoenix Incarnation Plus. Once you awaken the Phoenix avatar within you, you tap into primordial flame, rebirth, invincibility, unrivaled regeneration. The entry requirements are brutal: genetic alignment tests, ritual sacrifices, absolute mastery of self-discipline. But after that, he let the words hang. After that, your power eclipses anything a Tree Shepherd or even a 3-level atavistic wizard could dream of. Penelope exchanged a glance with Kate. "We haven't even unlocked our Phoenix avatars yet," she admitted, voice low. "How do we know we can handle Plus?" "It sounds extreme." Ryan gave a small smile. "That's why you're here. We start with the Avatar Awakening rituals tomorrow at dawn. Once you pass those, I'll guide you into the Phoenix Incarnation Plus framework, step by step. No more dead-end systems. You're finally on the right road." Penelope drew in a steady breath. Kate nodded beside her. The hall fell silent as the weight of Ryan's promise settled over them. The Tree Shepherd path was behind them now. Ahead lay the true fire of the Phoenix, and with it, a power beyond measure. Kate's round eyes gleamed with curiosity. "If we enter the Phoenix avatar, will we also gain the magic transformation ability?" Ryan's face lit up. Brilliant idea. He tapped his thigh with excitement. "Ever since my last evolution, Penelope and you have never even tried the Phoenix Avatar Plus. You both lack the necessary innate qualifications, and let's be honest, your personalities haven't made it any easier. Besides, my current Phoenix Avatar Plus only increases a wizard's chance of unlocking the Phoenix's secret to longevity. It doesn't grant a full-blown magic transformation. To get that, we'd have to reopen our innate powers and refine them all over again." He paused, then added, "But there is a way. The true, upgraded form of the Phoenix Avatar is called the Moon's Phantom. From the celestial moon realm, what I call the Kingdom of God, I can manifest my true body and invoke the descent of the divine. That ritual would allow both of you to step fully into the Phoenix Avatar with every effect, including magic transformation. After all, how many believers share such a direct bond with the divine, almost a fusion of soul and flesh?" Caught up in his own excitement, Ryan swept Kate into his arms and pressed his cheek against her modest chest. Kate's eyes shot open in shock. "What are you doing, you little brat?" she shrieked, her face flaming as she wriggled free. Ryan grinned sheepishly. "Sorry, I just got carried away. But imagine the power we'll have once you and Penelope embrace the Moon's Phantom." Penelope, standing just beyond their circle of light, folded her arms and raised an eyebrow. "When do we start?" she asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. Ryan looked from Penelope to Kate, determination shining in his eyes. "Tonight, under the full moon." Kate managed a reluctant nod. "Fine, but no more cheek pinching, okay?" He laughed and offered Kate a hand up. "Deal. Now let's prepare to transcend all limits." Penelo's arrival lit up the room. At the sound of her voice, Kate's cheeks flamed crimson, and she sagged against Ryan's shoulder, as if her bones had suddenly turned to water. "You're back already?" Penelo stammered, her wide eyes rimmed with embarrassment. She trembled, sure she knew why Ryan had returned, and she hadn't agreed to it. Ryan arched an eyebrow, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Since when did I need your permission?" he teased, then hurried to soften his tone. "No, that's not what I meant. Hearing Kate just now gave me a new idea. Something far better than making another batch of phoenix feathers. I can fully empower the phoenix incarnation, then channel your essence through me as a conduit." Penelo, the only person in the room who still had her wits about her besides Ryan, frowned in frustration. She and Kate had been training and experimenting for over a month, only to end up stalled at every turn. "Why didn't you think of this sooner?" she demanded. Ryan waved off her question. "Because the incarnation wasn't strong enough before. If you'd tried to fuse with me, your body and mind would have been overwhelmed by the raw power. Now that I've ramped it up, it can support the strain, and that means you can safely tap into it." He paused and grinned. "Had I known it could hold this much energy, I'd have let you try weeks ago." Kate leaned heavily against him, flushed but hopeful, while Penelo exchanged a wary look with her. Between them stood the promise of a true breakthrough, the chance to awaken the Phoenix's might once and for all. "Wouldn't it be better if we spent our newly freed hours doing something else?" Ryan asked, his cheeks warming. He shifted uncomfortably. No matter how he tried to smooth things over, he knew Kate wouldn't let the matter rest. She never did. Above them shone a bright, waning moon, one of the phases known in traditional lunar lore as the disseminating moon, sometimes called the radiating moon. In the old lunar calendar, each night marks a different phase: new moon, waxing crescent; first quarter, waxing gibbous; full moon, waning gibbous; last quarter, and waning crescent. Tonight's half-illuminated orb, halfway between full and last quarter, was believed to pour energy outward, lending magic to the night. Far above the earth, in the silent emptiness of space, faint ripples began to stir, as though the moon's radiance itself were moaning in cosmic resonance. The moon hung bright and clear, yet unmistakably bitten by darkness. Back on land, the tree shepherd's initiation ceremony was underway at the warren outside Ottery St. Catchpole in Devon. Rabbits of every age gathered in a clearing by moonlight, their ears twitching in reverence. At the same moment, high over Nottingham Forest and the fortress known as Smith Castle, that same waning moon cast its ghostly glow across ancient stones and whispering oaks, binding both scenes beneath one silvered sky. Under the waning moon's pale glow, two figures, tall, dark-haired Kate and slight, silver-eyed Penelope, sat cross-legged at the center of a ring formed by 8 gleaming stoves. Tonight, they were performing the ancient rite to awaken a new phoenix incarnation. Each stove held identical crimson feathers, drawn from the same sacred flock, and around their feet the earth was carved with runes, verses of praise for the phoenix, transcribed into living magic. Time lost all meaning as the flames danced. Then, one by one, the feathers began to melt, like candles shedding blood-red wax. The molten strands dripped down the silver-white walls of the stoves and seeped into the rune-etched soil, where they vanished with a hiss. Suddenly, the air shivered. It wasn't the ground that trembled, but the fabric of space itself. Above them, the waning crescent moon peeled away from its fuller half, as though 2 moons coexisted in the night sky. Cold white beams fractured and swirled, thickening around the circle in an ethereal mist. In that moment, Smith Castle, its battlements, its towers, its ancient stones, turned ashen silver. Every surface gleamed under the otherworldly light, as if the entire fortress had been dipped into moonlight. Kate's hand hovered over the runes, and Penelope closed her eyes, chanting the final invocation. The air crackled with power, and then, just as the castle seemed poised to burst into silver flame, the ritual reached its tipping point, to be continued. Penelope and Kate spoke in perfect unison. "Lord of the starry sea, inexhaustible Ouroboros, moon incarnate, who forever radiates power and guides us unfailingly to the true North Star, grant us the magic of eternal life." The moment the words left their lips, a pale luminescence spread over their alabaster skin. In each of their silver-white eyes, a brilliant miniature moon appeared. From that moonlight, Slender threads of radiant silver wove outward like a spider's web, stretching toward the 8 braziers arrayed before them. One by one, those silvery strands entered the furnaces, and the fierce red flames within gradually cooled and blanched to a soft, moonlit white. Then a clear, melodious voice echoed through the chamber. The gathered moonlight coalesced into a magnificent phoenix, its crimson feathers glinting with silver runes, its slender tail streaming behind it like liquid starlight. For a heartbeat, the runes pulsed with power. Then, as if satisfied, they winked out, and the castle's torches returned to their familiar amber glow. Before Penelope and Kate stood not a beast of legend, but a tall, elegant woman whose every movement hinted at otherworldly grace. As she stepped forward, the scarlet sigils that arched around the 2 young sorceresses flickered once, then settled into a steady silver glow, a promise of the eternal magic now bound to them. Penelope and Kate's eyes shimmered back to their normal color. A sharp crack split the air as their skin fractured, and a molten, crimson ichor oozed from the fissures. The glowing liquid crawled across the floor, drawn inexorably toward the ancient runes carved into the stone. It was as if time itself flowed backward. Each drop of fiery blood was absorbed by the inscriptions until, at the final moment, Penelope and Kate's flesh healed, their skin returning to its original pallor. In the next heartbeat, the 2 women dissolved into streams of light. Where they had stood, 2 magnificent phoenixes now stood in their place, wings unfurled and feathers aflame with radiant fire. With a synchronized beat, the phoenixes lifted off the ground, ready to soar into the sky. Chapter 82. Luna the Sharp Dawn's first light revealed a most peculiar dwelling perched on the hillside, a squat cylinder of gleaming black iron, its surface so smooth it seemed forged from a single monstrous chess rook. The countryside lay hushed, the world still wrapped in the lazy quiet that follows night, when suddenly a small figure sprang from the iron shell. She was certainly awake far earlier than any ordinary Briton. Most wouldn't stir before 6, let alone a child. Yet this girl moved with astonishing agility. She darted through the tangled underbrush, weaving between strange, twisted plants whose branches threatened to snag her robes. A steep slope that would slow any normal traveler barely registered under her feet. Instead, she harnessed gravity and her own nimble footwork, accelerating downhill until she became nothing more than a fleeting white blur. Had an unsuspecting muggle been watching, they might have sworn they'd glimpsed a mountain elf. What would normally have taken over 10 minutes to navigate in cautious steps, she covered in mere moments. By the time the sun had fully crested the horizon, Luna stood at the forest's edge, chest rising and falling with quiet excitement. Today, whatever awaited her beyond those trees would find her already well on her way. Luna paused beside the winding mountain stream and lifted her chin, addressing the breeze. "Come out, Ryan. I know you're here." Her voice was steady, but all that answered was a lilting birdsong and a sudden flicker of sparks. Then, in an instant, a fiery red bird, its feathers glowing like coals, appeared above her head. "You must be the Ravenclaw phoenix," Luna said, as if confirming something she'd long known, rather than asking for the first time. The splendid creature didn't so much as beat its wings. Tucking them neatly to its sides, it hovered weightless in midair, blinking at her with narrow, curious eyes. "Ryan, you can shift into human form," Luna continued, her tone surprisingly serene. There was a certain theatricality to her calm. She could just as easily have been peddling illusions at a traveling fair. From the phoenix's long, curved beak came a clear, amused voice. "Luna, you'd make a perfect charlatan." A shower of sparks lit the air, and in an instant a dark-haired, silver-eyed boy appeared at Luna's side. With effortless grace, he scooped her up in his arms. Of course it was Ryan, and bundled against him was the white-haired witch, Luna. "I'm not choosing divination," Luna declared, wriggling free just enough to draw her wand. She aimed it at the pebbles scattered along the stream bank, murmured an incantation, and conjured a sturdy net. Its mesh glinted with protective wards, nothing like the flimsy paper nets novices sometimes use. A second flick of her wand produced a small wooden stool behind her. She slipped her wand into her robes, then withdrew a bottle of lavender-tinted liquid that looked a lot like beet juice. "Here, Gordigan tea," she offered, passing it to Ryan. He caught the bottle without missing a beat. I still don't see why you'd refuse divination, he said, twisting off the cap. He'd grown used to this peculiar brew over the summer, but his brow furrowed as soon as he caught its scent. You have the talent for it. In the original timeline, Luna had eagerly enrolled in divination class back in 3rd grade, yet here she was, flatly rejecting it. Before he could voice his astonishment, Ryan winced at the tea's tangy sweetness, slapped his forehead, and moaned. Luna's notorious sixth sense had struck again. She'd seen something ahead that made divination not just useless, but dangerous. And somehow, Ryan knew she was right. Ryan said nothing. Luna, already perched on a small stool at the stream's edge, guided her little net through the clear water. Honestly, it's better if I'm a bit muddled, she remarked without looking up at him. Besides Hermione, you also know Lewinster and Clearwater. Her gaze stayed fixed on the brightly colored round fish wriggling beneath the surface. Ryan's jaw clenched. Merlin's beard, he muttered, hating himself for what had just happened. He'd tried to resist, but in the end he'd still handed Luna the potion, not a full override, but enough. Now that she'd drunk it, she could almost read his every mortal thought. She'd gone even further, naming Kate and Penelope, names he hadn't even considered aloud. And worst of all, she'd uncovered his Phoenix state identity. He'd assumed the Phoenix form today, because Kate and Penelope had unlocked the Phoenix Avatar Plus version last night, stirring long-buried memories. He'd planned to surprise little Luna with a glimpse of that majestic form once more. Instead, he'd shot himself in the foot, laying every secret bare. Ryan's suspicions sank in the moment he saw Luna smile at him. He wondered if she'd pieced everything together, from the precise timing of the Ravenclaw Phoenix's arrival to his awkward run-ins with Kate and Penelope all week. Before he could speak, Luna's soft, otherworldly voice drifted across the riverbank and stole his words. I wasn't deducing anything from your mishaps, she said, her lips curving with amusement. Ryan's heart twitched. What the? Is she reading my mind? Luna laughed, a sound like wind chimes. Mind reading? No, not at all. I just felt bad. You came all the way out here today to help me catch those colorful ballfish, and then I went and teased you. Ryan tried to sink into a squat, crestfallen, but before he even reached the ground, a small wooden stool, carved in the same delicate style as Luna's, appeared under his feet. Startled, he stretched out a hand, and a slender fishing net materialized in his palm, the wood grain matching the stools perfectly. Your magic is truly remarkable, Luna whispered, eyes shining. Ryan tucked his lips into a half-smile. Humph. Don't get sentimental on me. They spent the next few minutes in companionable silence, comparing notes on which tomes Ryan would need and which charms he'd have to master before he could reproduce that graceful summoning spell. Then, side by side, they leaned forward and dipped the net into the clear stream. From afar, they looked like two friends quietly fishing, though in truth, they were forging a bond that went far beyond simple chores and schoolyard antics. The chapter isn't over yet. Please turn the page to keep reading. Even with their laughably lazy approach, 2 or 3 unlucky colored fish still swam right up to their line. But Ryan and Luna merely flicked their wrists, let the fish slip off, and went back to watching the ripples fade. Their fishing was less about catching anything and more about zoning out side by side. Luna's father, so devoted to colored fish that he'd even written an entire cookbook of recipes, was forced to content himself with other fare this morning. The only clue to his former obsession was the pot of gold-root tea standing between them. Before Ryan appeared, he'd harvested wild gold-root as the ultimate bait to lure those shimmering fish. After netting far more than he could eat, he invented the tea as a gentle way to curb his habit. By the time the sun fully cleared the horizon, Ryan stood and stretched. It was time to slip away before Luna or her father could notice, and before anyone tempted him to reveal that secret bait recipe. Luna looked up abruptly. Do you have something important to tell me today? Ryan nodded. I do, and since you're interested in plant magic, I've prepared 2 options for you. With a flick of his wrist, 2 thin booklets materialized and landed gently on Luna's pale thighs. Sensing her hesitation, he went on. The first is Phoenix Incarnation, the spell I just demonstrated. It lets you transform into a phoenix. The second is Tree Shepherd. That one cultivates a living tree within your body, forging a contract that grants you its plant-based abilities alongside your own metamorphosis. In truth, Tree Shepherd is Ryan's own enhanced version of the contract spell, while Phoenix Incarnation is a more restricted form of his full Phoenix mastery. Luna could learn to become a Phoenix herself, but she wouldn't be able to summon a separate Phoenix body, as Ryan can. By offering her this limited variant, Ryan ensured she would never suspect that he'd given Hermione, Kate, and Penelope the more powerful incarnations while traveling with her. Chapter 83. Goodbye. Bella Luna chose the Phoenix avatar, just as Hermione, who was thousands of miles away in London, had done. Their decisions came almost simultaneously. Ryan watched Luna carefully, half expecting her to sense Hermione's presence, but all he felt was a pang of disappointment. In his previous life, he'd heard the old saying, "Children make choices, adults want them all." He'd half expected one of them to echo that sentiment. Instead, when asked to pick just one, each of them did exactly that, selecting only the Phoenix avatar and disregarding the other option entirely. Both forms of magic were Ryan's masterpieces, but the Phoenix Avatar Plus stood head and shoulders above the original. Unlike the first version, which served mainly as an undetectable shadow clone, Phoenix Avatar Plus enabled its user to conceal their body within a pocket dimension Ryan had named the Dantian. It also emitted a far stronger magical signature. Gifted practitioners could even unlock the secret of the Phoenix's immortality and adapt it to themselves. Once they mastered it, their mana would undergo a transformation much like a Nirvana rebirth, and new abilities would blossom in accordance with their natural talents. Here's a smooth, idiomatic rendering of the passage. As for the Tree Shepherd technique, I've added a way to open the Dantian's latent organ. By planting a contracted tree there, I can sustain the pocket space indefinitely, while the sapling itself bolsters its host's energy. From that tree, and depending on its species and a wizard's personal specialty, 2 new abilities will sprout. My version combines this enhanced Tree Shepherd art with the Phoenix Incarnation. Far from clashing, these 2 magics actually reinforce one another. The permanent Dantian chamber makes the Phoenix transformation far smoother. Although you still can't manifest 3 distinct forms, mastering both disciplines effectively counts as 1.5 transformations in your own field, half a step beyond simply learning the Phoenix Incarnation. What Hermione and Luna will gain, then, hinges on their individual strengths. Ryan's explanation hung in the air until, all at once, he snapped his head toward the burrow. The burrow? Did something happen there? Luna blinked, curious. Why do you ask? He shook his head, lips curling in a wry smile. Never mind, just felt a little resonance. Probably just the space settling. This version preserves every plot point and detail while flowing more naturally for English readers. In Harry's mind, Task 6, face the remaining memories and digest them, wasn't truly finished until school began. A few days earlier, when Neville visited the burrow, Harry had managed to process enough of those memories to make the scarlet beast mask on his left cheek vanish. But that was only the shell of the task. If the sequence potion, and by extension, the Dark Wizard's influence, was like a capsule, Harry had swallowed the casing but never actually absorbed the medicine inside, the memories themselves. By Ryan's calculations, Task 6 should wrap up on September 1st, the first day of term at Hogwarts. Yet nobody anticipated that, with the Arbormancer's arrival, Harry would digest every last memory in his dreamscape overnight. That dramatic breakthrough was all thanks to the sudden germination of Harry's contract tree. This is fascinating, Ryan whispered to Luna, still reeling from what had happened. I wonder how Task 7 will change now. Harry, for his part, wasn't entirely shocked by the Arbormancer's arrival. 2 days before, when Neville had dropped by the burrow, Harry had been elated to see the beast mask dissolve. At last, he could meet his own reflection without flinching. When the summons arrived, the task panel flickering in his retina still read, Task 6, incomplete. He didn't mind. At least he'd broken free from the compulsion that forced him into nightly intimacy with Ginny. Now, when he woke, he could choose, or simply go without. But every night, one figure invaded his dreams. Bellatrix Lester. Ange stood before him, tall and commanding, her thick dark hair gleaming, lashes like velvet fans framing eyes heavy with obsession. Her skin, smooth, dark, and silky, intoxicated him. the way she worshipped him. Ginny had never come close. Neville's greatest enemy haunted his mind with memories of that lithe, naked form and her unmatched prowess in pleasure. He could not erase her voice calling him master over and over. In those moments, she was his only beloved, the one person he felt he truly loved, and he trembled at how much it made him feel like Voldemort. Yet the darker self in his dream both craved and feared her. Time and again he'd lash out, even attempt to kill her, only to wake again with her shadow clinging to his thoughts. Those nightly visions, coupled with lingering daytime fantasies, pounded at his temples until his head threatened to split. He found relief in the raw openness of the wild. Out on the moor, beneath the open sky, he met Neville in breathless collisions of flesh and desperation. Only there, only in Neville's steady gaze and unwavering presence, could Harry silence the storm inside his mind, if only for a little while. Harry realized, with a sinking feeling, that Bella wasn't the girl he'd fancied, but a Death Eater, Neville's most bitter enemy. To Neville, she was every bit as dreadful as Voldemort was to Harry himself. So when he returned to his dormitory that evening, the enchanted saplings in the greenhouse stirred no fresh excitement in him. He lay back on his bed, shut his eyes, banished thoughts of the dark elf, and drifted swiftly into sleep. Outside his window, 5 clay pots rested beneath the sprawling banyan tree. In the moonlight, the soil in each pot began to heave as dormant seeds stirred to life. Radicles curled downward into the earth. Plumules and embryonic axes arched upward. By dawn, slender green shoots had broken the surface. Each pot bore a tender holly seedling, its leaves quivering in the soft morning breeze. Upstairs in his 4-poster bed on the 3rd floor, Harry's rest was troubled. He slipped into a memory, one he had never meant to reclaim. He stood in a dimly lit chamber, candlelight flickering off cold stone walls. Before him lay a heavy golden locket, its surface etched with sinister runes, resting on a cushion of deep crimson velvet. Lord Voldemort hovered over it, his voice a low hiss. As he wove dark enchantments into the trinket, the locket pulsed with a malevolent glow. Harry watched, transfixed, as the final words of the spell sealed a fragment of the Dark Lord's soul inside that ornate vessel. A chill settled over him. He knew, instinctively, that this memory was only the beginning of a far more dangerous journey. He extended his pale, slender left hand and lifted the locket into the dim torchlight. "The mark of Slytherin," he whispered, watching a sinuous silver S gleam across its surface. A rasping breath cut through the silence, and he glanced down with mild annoyance. Crumpled on the cold stone floor was a figure he recognized immediately. Caradoc Dearborn, once immortalized in the First Order of the Phoenix photograph, now vanished for 6 months, his body never recovered. Dearborn's dark gray hair was matted, his distinctive mustache disheveled. Invisible chains bound his wrists behind him and his ankles together, forcing him into a tortured crouch. He trembled, lips parting as if to speak, but no words emerged, only choked, pleading gasps. Voldemort felt no sympathy. Instead, an ugly thrill coursed through him. With deliberate slowness, he drew the yew-wand from his robe, the very wand that had haunted his dreams all these years, and trained it on his captive. "Caradoc Dearborn," he said softly, voice echoing against the dungeon walls. "Dumbledore's most loyal follower, his final student in transfiguration." He allowed a moment to savor the fear flickering in Dearborn's eyes. "How fitting that you should end up at my mercy. Your mother's connection to the Gauntline, though faint, is still real. It gives you perfect worth for Avada Kedavra. Goodbye, Bella, and farewell, cowardice." A jet of green deathlight erupted from his fingertips. Dearborn crumpled to the floor, utterly still. The bulging blue veins of excitement slackened, leaving nothing but the pale, lifeless skin of the fallen man. Yet Harry hardly noticed. He strained to recall the street address from his dream, but every scrap of memory was lost to one image, that graceful, ebony-skinned woman. One by one, the frames of their shared moments dissolved from his mind, and with them came a torrent of grief Voldemort had never known, deeper than any agony of the soul. With a harsh, rattling breath, Harry awoke in the real world. His emerald eyes burned with unfamiliar sorrow, tears glistening on his lashes. Still half lost between sleep and waking, he whispered the words that haunted him. "Goodbye, Bella." I finally got to use that line. You know, Daniel, the actor who plays Harry in our world, had a teenage crush on Helena, the actress who portrays Bella. Maybe I overdid the details, but hey, mission accomplished. Cool. Could you please provide the chapter text you'd like revised? Once I have the full passage, I'll rewrite it into polished, idiomatic English while preserving all key plot points and character details.